Welcome to Wild West Chronicle, your front row seat to the untamed lands where legends are born and stories of courage, betrayal, and adventure ride with the wind. From dusty trails to hidden towns, from outlaws to heroes, every tale carries the spirit of the West. Strap in, keep your eyes sharp, and let the journey unfold. On Christmas Eve, he found her sleeping in the hayloft with her baby, and everything changed. From that moment of desperate survival emerged a story of transformation, courage, and the power of chosen family. Eva Brennan's journey from Evangeline Ashford proves that our darkest moments can become the foundation for our greatest triumphs, and that sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never saw coming. Take your time to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. And don't forget, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Your engagement helps this channel grow and brings more stories to life. Let's get back to the story now. The barn door groaned against the wind, and Colt Brennan stepped inside with snow melting into his collar. Christmas Eve had painted Redemption Ridge white, but the cold had teeth tonight. He'd come to check the horses one last time before heading home to his empty house. The same routine he'd kept for 3 years since Martha died. The lantern swung in his grip, throwing shadows across the hay bales stacked high against the western wall. That's when he heard it, a sound so soft he almost missed it beneath the howling wind. A baby's whimper, thin and desperate, coming from the loft above. Cole froze. Nobody should be here. The Holbrook Ranch had been his sole responsibility since the old man passed, and he'd locked every gate himself at sundown. His heart hammered as he climbed the ladder, each rung creaking under his weight. The lantern light reached the loft before he did, and what he saw stopped his breath cold. She was maybe 20 years old, curled in the hay like something broken and discarded. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, caked with mud and what looked like dried blood. Dark hair fell across her face in tangled waves, and her lips had gone blue from the cold. But it was a bundle in her arms that made Colt's chest tighten. A tiny baby, wrapped in a blanket, so thin it might as well have been paper. The infant's face was red from crying, little fists waving weakly in the freezing air. The girl's eyes were closed, her breathing so shallow Colt couldn't tell if she was unconscious or just beyond exhausted. He set the lantern down carefully, his hands shaking. Who was she? How long had she been here? The hay beneath her was soaked through, and when he knelt beside her, he could feel the cold radiating from her skin. The baby let out another cry, stronger this time, and the girl's eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Colt had delivered calves in snowstorms and patched up ranch hands after bar fights. But this was different. This was a mother and child, abandoned or hiding, and either way, they were dying in his barn. He touched her shoulder gently, and her eyes snapped open, wild, terrified, the color of storm clouds. She jerked away from him, clutching the baby tighter, and tried to speak, but only managed a raspy whisper. "Please," she breathed, and the word cracked in half. Don't send us back." Her whole body trembled, and Colt could see the fear carved into every line of her face. This wasn't just cold or hunger. This was someone running from something worse than death. He raised his hand slowly, the way he would with a spooked horse. "I'm not sending you anywhere," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "But you're freezing. That baby needs warmth, and so do you. Let me help." She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for lies or cruelty. Whatever she saw, there must have been enough, because her grip on the baby loosened slightly, and a tear slid down her cheek. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. Colt pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. then carefully lifted the baby from her arms. The infant was lighter than he expected, too light, and when he looked down at the tiny face, something shifted inside his chest. The baby girl. He could tell by the pink ribbon barely hanging onto the blanket, blinked up at him with dark eyes that seemed far too aware for someone so small. "What's her name?" he asked. The girl's voice was barely audible. "Grace." Colt nodded, tucking the baby against his chest to share his body heat. "I'm Colt. Can you walk?" She tried to stand, but her legs buckled immediately, and he caught her with his free arm. She weighed almost nothing, just bones and desperation held together by sheer will. He could feel her shaking against him, and when she looked up, her eyes were filled with something that broke his heart, hope mixed with the absolute certainty that it would be ripped away. "I've got a house a quarter-mile from here," Colt said, already planning the fastest route through the snow. "Warm bed, food, and a fire. Nobody's going to hurt you there." She opened her mouth to argue or thank him. He couldn't tell which, but her strength gave out, and she slumped against him. Colt adjusted his grip, holding both the baby and the mother as carefully as he could, and started toward the ladder. The wind screamed outside, and snow was already drifting against the barn walls. If he hadn't come tonight, if he decided to skip the evening check just this once, he would have found them in the morning, frozen, gone. Just another tragedy in a territory that had seen too many. But he had come. And as he stepped out into the blizzard with Grace tucked against his heart and her mother barely conscious in his arms, Colt Brennan made a decision that would change everything. He didn't know who they were running from or what horrors they'd left behind. But he knew one thing for certain. Nobody was taking them. Not tonight. Not ever. The Ashford mansion sat like a crown jewel on the hill overlooking Silver Creek, its white columns gleaming in the afternoon sun. Inside, Evangeline Ashford stood in front of the mirror in her room, tried to make herself invisible. She'd learned the trick years ago. Stand very still, breathe very quietly, and maybe they forget she existed. Her reflection stared back at her with hollow eyes, the expensive green dress hanging off her frame like a costume she'd never asked to wear. Downstairs, she could hear her father's voice booming through the halls, probably yelling at the staff about some minor imperfection in the Christmas preparations. Raymond Ashford was a man who demanded perfection in everything except his own behavior. He owned half the town, controlled the other half, and treated anyone without money or status like dirt beneath his boots. Evangeline had spent 20 years watching him crush people for sport, and she'd learned to keep her head down and her mouth shut. But keeping quiet hadn't protected her from everything. She pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling the slight swell beneath the silk fabric that no one had noticed yet. Grace. She'd already named her in secret, whispering it late at night when the house finally went silent. The baby's father was gone, not dead, just disappeared the moment Evangeline told him she was pregnant. Carter Hayes had been a ranch hand working on one of her father's properties. All charm and easy smiles until the moment things got complicated. Then he'd vanish like smoke, leaving her to face her father's rage alone. Except she hadn't told Raymond yet. She couldn't, because she knew exactly what would happen. He arranged for the baby to disappear, sent Evangeline away to some distant relative to hide the scandal, and then return her to Silver Creek with the stain scrubbed away and a warning to never embarrass him again. The door to her room burst open without warning, and her stepmother Constance swept in wearing a dress that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. Constance Ashford was beautiful in the way a poisonous flower is beautiful, all delicate petals hiding deadly thorns. She'd married Raymond 5 years ago, shortly after Evangeline's real mother died from pneumonia, and she'd spent every day since making it clear that Evangeline was an inconvenience she tolerated rather than a daughter she loved. "Your father wants you downstairs," Constance said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We're having guests for Christmas Eve dinner tomorrow, and he expects you to look presentable. That means a different dress, proper hair, and for God's sake, try to smile. You look like you're attending a funeral." Evangeline nodded, keeping her face blank. "Yes, ma'am." Constance's eyes narrowed, studying her with the intensity of a hawk spotting prey. "Have you lost weight? You look thin." Panic fluttered in Evangeline's chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I haven't been hungry lately." It wasn't entirely a lie. Morning sickness had stolen her appetite for weeks. Constance stepped closer, her perfume overwhelming in the small space. "Well, eat something. Your father is trying to arrange a marriage with the Thornton family, and Harold Thornton won't want a wife who looks half dead." The words hit like a slap. Harold Thornton was 50 years old, twice widowed, and known for having a temper that rivaled her father's. The thought of being handed over to him like property made Evangeline's stomach turn. "I didn't know father was arranging a marriage," she said carefully. Constance smiled, and it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course he is. Did you think you'd have a choice? You're 20 years old, Evangeline, past the age where most women are already married and producing heirs. Your father's been patient, but his patience has limits." After Constance left, Evangeline sank onto the edge of her bed and tried to breathe through the suffocating weight pressing down on her chest. She had maybe a month before her pregnancy became impossible to hide. After that, everything would unravel. Her father would explode with rage. Constance would look at her with disgust, and Harold Thornton would withdraw his offer faster than lightning. The scandal would destroy the Ashford reputation, and Raymond would never forgive her for that. She'd heard stories of girls in her position, sent away to convents or locked in sanitariums, their babies taken and given to strangers. Some disappeared entirely, their names never spoken again. Evangeline pressed both hands to her stomach, feeling grace shift beneath her palms. She couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't. That night, she lay awake listening to the house settle around her, forming a plan that terrified her as much as it gave her hope. She had a small amount of jewelry her real mother had left her. Nothing extravagant, but enough to sell for travel money. She knew the ranch schedules, knew which routes the workers took, knew where the blind spots were in her father's security. And she knew that if she was going to run, it had to be soon, before her father announced the engagement, before anyone discovered her secret, before the walls closed in completely. 3 days. She'd give herself 3 days to prepare, and then on Christmas Eve, while everyone was distracted with dinner preparations and guests, she'd slip away. She didn't know where she'd go or how she'd survive, but anything was better than staying here, trapped in a gilded cage of a monster for a father, and a future that would destroy both her and her daughter. Evangeline stared at the ceiling until dawn, counting her heartbeats and praying for courage she wasn't sure she had. Morning arrived with frost coating the windows and Evangeline's nerves stretched thin as wire. She dressed carefully in layers, claiming the cold had gotten into her bones, and went downstairs for breakfast wearing her most obedient expression. The dining room smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread, but her stomach churned at the sight of food. Her father sat at the head of the table reading the Silver Creek Gazette, his face set in its usual expression of controlled displeasure. Constance picked at a plate of eggs, her attention focused on the seating arrangements for tomorrow's dinner party. Neither of them looked up when Evangeline entered. She was invisible again, which suited her purposes perfectly. She forced herself to eat a piece of toast and drink some tea while listening to their conversation about which families were worth impressing and which ones had fallen from social grace. The casual cruelty in their voices made her skin crawl. After breakfast, Evangeline excused herself to the library, claiming she wanted to read. Instead, she spent the next hour carefully removing the small portrait of her mother from its frame. Behind it, tucked into the backing, was the envelope containing her mother's jewelry, a pearl necklace, 2 gold rings, and a brooch shaped like a hummingbird. Not a fortune, but enough to buy passage somewhere far from Silver Creek. She wrapped the jewelry in a handkerchief and slipped it into her pocket, her hand shaking. This was theft, even if the items were rightfully hers. If her father caught her, he'd call it stealing from the family estate. He'd use it as proof of her unworthiness, another reason to lock her away. She replaced the portrait carefully and left the library, trying to look casual even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. The house felt like a prison today. Every hallway too narrow, every room too small. She needed to get outside, needed to breathe air that didn't smell like her father's cigar smoke and Constance's perfume. She found her coat and slipped out the back entrance, heading toward the gardens that stretched behind the mansion. The groundskeeper, an older man named Thomas, was trimming the hedges despite the cold. He'd been kind to Evangeline when she was younger, teaching her the names of flowers and letting her hide in the greenhouse when her father's temper exploded. "Miss Evangeline," he said, tipping his hat. "Cold day for a walk." She managed a smile. "I needed fresh air." Thomas studied her face for a moment, and she wondered what he saw there. "You all right? You look troubled." The concern in his voice nearly broke her composure, but she held it together. "Just thinking about the future," she said truthfully. He nodded slowly. "Future's a strange thing. Sometimes the path we think we're on ain't the one we're meant to walk." His words felt prophetic, and Evangeline wondered if somehow he knew what she was planning. She spent another hour wandering the estate grounds, mentally mapping her escape route. The stables were on the eastern edge of property, far enough from the main house that she could take a horse without being immediately noticed. She'd ride south toward Redemption Ridge, where her father's influence was weaker and the population sparse enough that a lone woman might slip through unnoticed. From there, she'd figure out her next move. The baby shifted inside her, a gentle flutter that reminded her exactly what was at stake. Grace deserved better than a life lived in shame and secrecy, better than a grandfather who would see her as nothing more than an embarrassment to her race. Evangeline pressed her hand to her stomach and made a silent promise. "I'll protect you, no matter what it costs." When she returned to the house, Constance was waiting in the foyer, her expression sharp with suspicion. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "Your father wants to speak with you in his study." Dread pulled in Evangeline's stomach, but she kept her voice steady. "I was just walking the gardens." Constance's eyes narrowed. "For over an hour? In this weather?" Before Evangeline could respond, her father's voice boomed from down the hall. "Evangeline, now!" She walked to his study on legs that felt like water, every step taking her closer to whatever fresh hell awaited. Raymond sat behind his massive desk, and standing beside him was Harold Thornton, older than she remembered, with cold eyes and hands that looked like they knew how to hurt. Her father gestured impatiently. "Mr. Thornton has graciously accepted my proposal. You'll be married the day after Christmas. We're announcing the engagement at tomorrow's dinner." The room tilted. Evangeline grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "Father, You'll thank Mr. Thornton for his generosity," Raymond cut her off, his voice hard as iron. and you'll comport yourself appropriately tomorrow evening. This marriage is crucial for our family's business interests." Harold stepped forward, taking her hand in his clammy grip. "I look forward to getting to know you better, my dear." His smile made her want to run screaming from the room, but she couldn't. Not yet. Not until tomorrow night, when the house was full of guests and distraction. So she did what she'd learned to do all her life. She smiled, nodded, and played the obedient daughter. "Thank you, Mr. Thornton," she managed to say. "I'm honored." The lie tasted like poison on her tongue. That night, she packed a small bag with practical clothes, a blanket, and what little money she'd managed to save. She hid it in the wardrobe, ready to grab at a moment's notice. Tomorrow, while Silver Creek's elite celebrated Christmas Eve in her father's mansion, she would disappear into the night, and she would never, ever come back. Evangeline woke before dawn on Christmas Eve with her heart already racing. Today was the day. In a few hours, the house would fill with guests. Servants would rush between the kitchen and dining room, and in the chaos of preparation, she would slip away unnoticed. She dressed in her riding clothes beneath a dress, layering carefully so no one would question the bulk. Her hands shook as she tied her hair back, and when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the pale, determined face staring back. This was it, the moment where everything either fell apart or finally made sense. She tucked her mother's jewelry deeper into her pocket and grabbed the small bag she'd hidden, then crept downstairs before anyone else was awake. The kitchen was empty except for the cook's assistant, a young girl named Mary who barely glanced up from kneading dough. Evangeline slipped through the back entrance and made her way toward the stables, staying in the shadows. The morning air bit through her clothes, and her breath came out in white clouds. Every sound made her flinch. A bird taking flight, a branch cracking under the weight of ice, the distant sound of the stable master's voice. She pressed herself against the side of the carriage house, waiting until he walked past on his morning rounds. Then she moved quickly to the stables, where the horses shifted restlessly in their stalls. She chose Rosemary, a gentle mare she'd ridden since childhood. The horse nickered softly in greeting, and Evangeline pressed her forehead against the warm neck, trying to steady her breathing. "We're going on an adventure," she whispered. "Just you and me." She saddled Rosemary as quietly as possible, every buckle and strap seeming impossibly loud in the pre-dawn stillness. Any moment someone would appear, would question what she was doing, would alert her father. But the moment stretched on and no one came. She led Rosemary out of the stable and mounted quickly, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward. The baby kicked hard, as if protesting the jostling, and Evangeline winced. "I know," she murmured. "I'm sorry, but we have to go." She guided Rosemary toward the southern edge of the property, staying off the main paths. The sky was beginning to lighten, painting the horizon in shades of pink and gold. Beautiful, if she'd had time to appreciate it. But all she could think about was distance, getting as far from Silver Creek as possible before anyone noticed she was gone. The property line came into view, marked by a low stone wall that Rosemary cleared easily. And then they were free, galloping across open territory with nothing but miles of wilderness ahead. Evangeline's heart soared even as terror gripped her chest. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. For the first few miles, adrenaline kept her going. But as the sun climbed higher and the temperature dropped, reality began to set in. She had no real plan beyond getaway. She didn't know these trails, didn't know where towns were, or which ranches might offer shelter. She brought some food and water, but not enough to last more than a day. And she was pregnant, exhausted and completely alone in territory that could kill even experienced travelers. By midday, snow began to fall. Light at first, just flurries that melted on her skin. But within an hour, it had become a full storm, wind whipping the flakes into blinding sheets of white. Rosemary whinnied nervously, and Evangeline leaned forward, trying to shield both of them from the worst of it. "It's okay," she said, though she wasn't sure if she was comforting the horse or herself. "We'll find shelter. We have to." But the landscape had become unrecognizable, every direction looking the same. She'd lost the trail somewhere in the storm, and now she was simply moving forward because stopping meant freezing. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time became meaningless in the white void. Evangeline's fingers went numb despite her gloves, and her face burned from the cold. The baby had stopped moving, which terrified her more than anything else. "Please," she whispered to the universe, to God, to anyone who might be listening. "Please, I'll do anything. Just keep her safe." When the barn appeared through the snow like a miracle, Evangeline almost cried with relief. She didn't know whose property this was. Didn't care. She dismounted clumsily, her legs barely holding her weight, and led Rosemary inside. The barn was dark and blessedly warm compared to the storm outside. She found an empty stall and collapsed into the hay, her whole body shaking. Grace kicked weakly, and Evangeline pressed both hands to her stomach. "We made it," she breathed. "We're safe." But safe was relative. She had no food left, no water, and no idea where she was. The storm showed no signs of stopping, and she was so tired, so incredibly tired. She pulled the thin blanket from her bag and wrapped it around herself and Grace, curling into the hay. Just a few minutes of rest, just enough to stop shaking. Then she'd figure out what to do next. Her eyes drifted closed and the world faded away. She didn't hear the barn door open hours later, didn't feel the temperature drop as night fell, didn't know that she and Grace were dying until a rough, kind voice said, "I'm not sending you anywhere," and warm hands lifted her from the darkness. Colt's house was small, built from logs and determination, but it was warmer than anywhere Evangeline had been in days. He kicked the door open and carried her inside, while Grace remained tucked against his chest, and the sudden heat made Evangeline gasp. Her skin burned as circulation returned, and tears leaked from her eyes. Whether from pain or relief, she couldn't tell. Colt laid her carefully on a bed near the fireplace, then placed Grace in her arms before turning to stoke the fire higher. Flames leaped up, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and Evangeline held her daughter close, feeling the tiny heartbeat flutter against her own. "You're going to be fine," Colt said, though his voice carried doubt. He brought blankets, thick wool ones that smelled like cedar and wood smoke, and piled them over both of them. Then he disappeared into what she assumed was a kitchen, and she heard the clatter of pots and the pump of water. When he returned, he carried a cup of something steaming. "Broth," he explained, kneeling beside the bed. "Not much, but it'll warm you from the inside." Evangeline tried to take the cup, but her hands shook too badly. Colt held it to her lips instead, patient as she sipped. The liquid was salty and rich, and her stomach accepted it gratefully. Grace fussed weakly, and Evangeline knew she needed to feed her daughter, but exhaustion had stolen everything. "She's hungry," she managed to say. Colt nodded. "I've got condensed milk. It's not perfect, but it'll keep her alive until morning." He disappeared again, returning with a makeshift bottle, a whiskey flask with a clean cloth wrapped around the opening. He'd warmed the milk, testing it on his wrist the way someone who'd cared for babies before would. Evangeline watched through heavy eyelids as he fed Grace, the big rancher cradling the tiny infant with surprising gentleness. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated. Giving him her real name meant risk. If anyone came looking, if word spread about a missing woman. But lying to the man who'd saved their lives felt wrong. "Evangeline," she finally said. "Evangeline Ashford." His eyes flickered with recognition at the surname. Everyone within 100 miles knew Raymond Ashford. "You're running from something." It wasn't a question. Evangeline nodded. Too tired to construct elaborate lies. "My father. He arranged a marriage to a man who she couldn't finish. Didn't need to." Colt's jaw tightened. "And the baby's father?" "Gone," she said flatly. "The moment he found out I was pregnant." Colt was quiet for a long moment, watching Grace drink with single-minded determination. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said finally. "Fever took her in 2 days. We never had children." The pain in his voice was old but still sharp, and Evangeline understood why he'd been so careful with Grace, why he'd looked at the baby with such gentle sadness. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head. "Not your burden to carry." He finished feeding Grace and settled the sleeping infant in Evangeline's arms. "You need rest, real rest, not just passing out from exhaustion. I'll keep the fire going, and we'll talk more in the morning." She wanted to thank him properly, wanted to explain how terrified she'd been in that barn, certain she and Grace would freeze before anyone found them. But sleep was already pulling her under, warm and irresistible. The last thing she remembered was Colt draping another blanket over them both and his quiet voice saying, "You're safe here." When she woke, pale winter sunlight was streaming through the window, and the smell of coffee filled the air. Grace was still asleep, her tiny face peaceful. Evangeline's body ached everywhere, muscles protesting the brutal ride through the storm. But she was alive. They were both alive. Colt appeared in the doorway, holding a plate. "Eggs and bread," he said. "Nothing fancy, but you need to eat." This time her hands were steady enough to feed herself, and the food was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Colt sat in a chair across from bed, his own plate balanced on his knee. He ate in silence for a while before finally speaking. "Your father's gonna come looking for you. Man like Raymond Ashford doesn't let go of things that belong to him." The words sent ice through her veins because they were true. "I know. And when he does, what do you want to tell him?" Evangeline looked down at Grace, at the perfect tiny fingers curled against the blanket. "Tell him we're dead," she said. "Tell him you found us too late." Colt studied her for a long moment, and she couldn't read his expression. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, but that means you stay hidden. No one in town can know you're here, not even the folks I trust. Can you do that?" Evangeline met his eyes, seeing the risk he was taking, the danger he was inviting by harboring her. "Why would you do this for us? You don't know me." Colt was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was rough with old grief. "Because Martha would have wanted me to. Because no woman should be forced into a marriage she doesn't want. And because..." He looked at Grace, and something softened in his face. "Because that baby deserves a chance at life that doesn't involve Raymond Ashford." It was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for her, and Evangeline felt tears spilled down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. Colt nodded once, then stood to clear the plates. "Rest today. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to keep you both safe." But as Evangeline drifted back to sleep with Grace warm in her arms, she couldn't shake the feeling that safety was temporary, that somewhere out there, her father was already hunting. Raymond Ashford discovered his daughter's absence at precisely 8:30 on Christmas Eve morning, when Constance went to check why Evangeline hadn't appeared for breakfast. The scream that echoed through the mansion brought him running, and what he found in her room made his blood pressure spike dangerously. The bed was neatly made, untouched from the previous night. The wardrobe stood open with clothes scattered across the floor, where she clearly searched for something practical. And on the dresser, positioned where it couldn't be missed, was a simple note. "I'm sorry. I can't marry him. Don't look for me." Raymond crumpled the note in his fist, rage flooding through him hot and vicious. The ungrateful little fool. After everything he provided, every opportunity he'd given her, and this was how she repaid him? By running away hours before the most important dinner party of the season, ruining his carefully constructed alliance with Harold Thornton. Constance hovered in the doorway, her face pale. "Raymond, the guests will be here in hours. What do we tell them?" "Nothing," he snarled. "We tell them nothing. Evangeline is feeling unwell and will join us when she's able." But inside, his mind was already calculating. How far could she have gotten? She'd taken a horse. The stable master had confirmed Rosemary was missing, which meant she had transportation. But she was soft, raised in luxury, with no survival skills and no real understanding of how brutal the territory was in winter. She couldn't have gone far. He called for his foreman, Garrett Kane, a man whose loyalty was measured in gold and whose conscience was non-existent. Kane appeared within minutes, sensing the urgency. "Sir," Raymond handed him the crumpled note. "My daughter has run away. I want her found. Today. Use whatever men you need. Check every ranch, every town within 50 miles. And when you find her," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "bring her home, intact." Kane's smile was ugly. "And if she resists?" "She won't be in any condition to resist by the time you drag her back," Raymond said coldly. "But I want her alive and unmarked. Harold Thornton expects a bride in reasonable condition." Kane nodded and left to gather men, and Raymond turned his attention to damage control. The dinner party couldn't be canceled. Too many important people had already committed. Too many business deals hinged on tonight's social arrangements. So he did what he did best. He lied. When Harold Thornton arrived that afternoon with his 2 adult sons, Raymond met him with practiced regret. "I'm afraid Evangeline has taken ill quite suddenly. A winter fever. The doctor says she's devastated to miss the festivities, but she's simply too weak to leave her bed." Harold's face darkened. "I wanted to see my future bride." "Of course," Raymond soothed. "Perhaps tomorrow, when she's feeling better. I assure you, this doesn't change our arrangement." But he could see doubt creeping into Harold's eyes, suspicion that something was wrong. The dinner party was torture. Raymond smiled and made toast while fury ate at him from the inside. Every hour that passed was another hour Evangeline gained distance, another hour his reputation hung by a thread. Around midnight, as the last guest finally departed, Kane returned with his men. The foreman's expression told Raymond everything before he spoke. "We found tracks heading south, but we lost them in the storm. Too much snow, too much wind. The trail's gone cold." Raymond's hands clenched into fists. "Then expand the search. Every ranch, every line shack, every cave big enough to hide in. I want her found." Kane hesitated. "Sir, with the storm, if she was caught in that, she might not have survived." The thought should have worried him, should have filled him with parental concern. Instead, Raymond felt only cold calculation. "If she's dead, I want proof. A body. Something I can show Thornton to explain why the wedding is canceled." Until then, we keep searching. Over the next 2 days, Kane's men scoured the territory. They checked ranches, questioned travelers, searched abandoned buildings. They found nothing. Evangeline had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. On the 3rd day, Kane reported that one of his men had checked the Holbrook Ranch, now managed by some widower named Brennan, and found nothing but an empty barn and a lot of snow. "Did you speak to Brennan himself?" Raymond demanded. Briefly, he said he'd been alone all Christmas Eve, checking his stock. Hadn't seen anyone. Raymond's instincts prickled. Did he seem nervous? Kane shrugged. Hard to tell. He's not the friendly type. But Raymond wasn't satisfied. Something about that timing felt wrong. The Holbrook Ranch was exactly the kind of isolated place where someone might hide. "Keep an eye on that property," he ordered. If Evangeline went aground somewhere, she'd need help. And help means people. Meanwhile, Harold Thornton's patience was wearing thin. He appeared at the mansion on the 4th day, demanding answers. Where is she, Raymond? The truth this time. Raymond maintained his facade of paternal concern. "We're searching. A possible sighting near Redemption Ridge. You've lost her," Harold interrupted, his voice hard. "Your own daughter, and you don't know where she is." "It's a temporary complication," Raymond insisted. "When we find her, if you find her," Harold corrected. "And even then, what kind of wife runs away before her own wedding? What does that say about her character?" Raymond felt the alliance crumbling, felt his carefully constructed plans disintegrating. "Give me 1 more week," he said, hating the pleading note in his voice. "If she's not found by then, I'll compensate you for the inconvenience." Harold studied him with cold eyes. "You have 3 days. After that, the engagement is dissolved, and I'll make sure everyone in Silver Creek knows why." He left without another word, and Raymond stood alone in his study, fury and humiliation warring in his chest. Evangeline had done this. His own daughter had destroyed his reputation, ruined his business arrangement, and made him look like a fool who couldn't control his own household. When he found her, and he would find her, she'd pay for every moment of this humiliation. She'd learn what happened to people who defied Raymond Ashford. He'd make sure of it. 2 weeks passed in Colt's small house, and Evangeline learned to navigate her new reality. She stayed inside during daylight hours, away from windows, while Colt worked the ranch. Grace grew stronger, her cries becoming more insistent, her eyes focusing with increasing awareness. At night, when darkness hid everything, Evangeline would step outside for brief moments, breathing cold air and staring at stars that seemed brighter out here than they ever had in Silver Creek. She was living in a cage again, but this one felt different. This cage was chosen, protected by walls of kindness rather than cruelty. Colt had established a routine that kept her hidden without making her feel like a prisoner. He'd bring supplies from town, but never mention her presence to anyone. He'd cook simple meals, and they'd eat together by lamplight, conversation sparse but comfortable. He taught her how to properly swaddle Grace, how to read the baby's different cries, how to function on the brutal sleep deprivation that came with a newborn. In return, Evangeline mended his clothes, organized his cluttered shelves, and tried to repay his kindness in whatever small ways she could. But the fear never fully left. Every time she heard hoofbeats approaching the house, her heart would hammer against her ribs. Every distant voice made her grab Grace and retreat to the back room where Colt had built a hidden space behind a false cabinet. He'd assured her it was probably unnecessary, that no one had any reason to search his property. But they both knew her father wouldn't stop looking. Men like Raymond Ashford didn't accept defeat, especially not from their own children. On the 15th day, Colt came home earlier than usual, his face tight with worry. Evangeline was nursing Grace by the fire, and she looked up sharply. "What's wrong?" He removed his hat slowly, turning it in his hands. "Saw Kane in town, your father's foreman. He was asking questions at the general store, showing people a sketch." Evangeline's blood turned to ice. "A sketch of me?" Colt nodded, said you'd run away, implied you were mentally unstable, offered a reward for information leading to your safe return. The word safe return rang hollow. There would be nothing safe about being dragged back to Silver Creek. Did anyone recognize me? Not from what I could tell. The sketch wasn't very good, made you look older, harder. But Evangeline, he paused, choosing his words carefully. Kane's not giving up. He's working his way through every ranch in the territory. He'll get here eventually. She looked down at Grace, sleeping peacefully after her feeding, completely unaware of the danger circling closer. "What do I do?" Colt sat heavily in his chair, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "We have options. I could take you further south, find someone else to shelter you. Or," he hesitated, or we make it so Kane has nothing to find." Evangeline didn't understand at first, but then his meaning clicked into place, and her breath caught. "You want to fake our deaths?" "It's already halfway done," Colt said quietly. "I told everyone who asked that I'd been alone on Christmas Eve. If we let it be known that I found 2 bodies in the barn after the storm, a woman and baby who'd frozen before I could save them, and that I buried them on my property, then the search ends. Your father gets closure. You get freedom." The idea was brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. But wouldn't they want to see the bodies? Not if they'd been in the ground 2 weeks. Not if I described the scene in enough detail to make them believe. And not if he trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Not if what? Not if I give them something to bury. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. When he unwrapped it, Evangeline saw the pearl necklace her mother had left her, the one she'd taken from the Ashford mansion. Her stomach dropped. "How did you?" "I found it in your coat pocket when I was hanging your things to dry. I recognized the Ashford crest on the clasp." He held it out to her. "If I found this on the body, it would confirm the identity, make it real enough that Kane wouldn't question further." Evangeline stared at the necklace, memories flooding back. Her mother's hands clasping it around her neck, the weight of it at formal dinners, the way it had caught the light. It was one of the few pieces of her old life she'd managed to save. "I can't," she whispered. "It's all I have left of her." Colt's expression softened. "I know what I'm asking, and if you can't do it, we'll find another way. But Evangeline, this is the cleanest solution. Give Kane something to take back to your father. Let them mourn you. Let them move on. Then you're free." She looked at Grace, at the perfect tiny life she created, the daughter who deserved better than constantly running and hiding. What was one necklace compared to a lifetime of freedom? What was a piece of jewelry compared to her daughter's safety? Slowly, she reached out and took the necklace from Colt's hand. The pearls felt cold against her skin. When, "Tomorrow, I'll ride into town, make it known that I found something disturbing in my barn. Let the story spread naturally. By the time Kane hears about it, enough people will have heard the tale that he won't question the details." That night, Evangeline couldn't sleep. She held the necklace in one hand and Grace in her other arm, feeling the weight of what she was about to do. Killing her old identity felt like dying, even though it was the only way to truly live. At dawn, Colt prepared to leave. He'd rehearsed the story until it sounded natural. The discovery of the frozen bodies, his attempt to save them too late, his decision to bury them quickly before anyone knew. He'd even dug 2 graves on the edge of his property, far enough from the house that visitors wouldn't see them, but close enough to be credible. "Are you ready?" he asked Evangeline. She handed him the necklace, and her hand shook. Tell them we look peaceful, like we'd just fallen asleep." Colt's eyes held understanding and sadness. "I will." He tucked the necklace carefully into his pocket. "When I get back, this is over. You'll be safe." But as he rode away, Evangeline couldn't shake the feeling that safety was illusion, that somewhere in Silver Creek, her father was plotting his next move, and that the real danger hadn't even begun. Colt walked into the general store in Redemption Ridge at precisely 10 in the morning, when he knew the place would be full of ranchers picking up supplies. His face was carefully composed, somber, troubled, the expression of a man carrying heavy news. The store owner, Dutch Carver, looked up from measuring out flour and nodded in greeting. "Colt, what brings you in?" Colt removed his hat and turned it slowly in his hands, the gesture of someone uncomfortable with what he was about to say. "Need to report something to the marshal. Found something on my property yesterday." The store went quiet. Conversations died mid-sentence as everyone turned to look at him. Dutch set down his measuring scoop. "What kind of something?" Colt's voice was low, rough. "2 bodies, woman and a baby, frozen in my barn. Looks like they got caught in the Christmas Eve storm." The reaction was immediate. Women gasped, men swore softly, and Dutch came around the counter with concern written across his weathered face. "Good Lord, you sure they were dead?" "Been dead for weeks," Colt said quietly. I was checking the barn that night, but I only checked the stalls. Didn't think to look in the loft. If I just looked up," he let his voice trail off, letting guilt color his words. It wasn't hard to fake. Part of him did feel guilty, not for the lie, but for what might have happened if he truly missed them. An older woman named Sarah Cross, who ran the boarding house, pressed a hand to her chest. That poor mother. Do you know who she was? Colt reached into his pocket and pulled out the pearl necklace, letting it dangle from his fingers. The pearls caught the light, and he saw recognition flash across several faces. Found this on her. Has the Ashford crest on clasp. The store erupted. Everyone started talking at once, voices overlapping in shock and speculation. Dutch grabbed the necklace, examining it closely. This is real Ashford jewelry. Expensive stuff. Sarah's expression shifted to something like pity. Could it be, wasn't there talk about Raymond Ashford's daughter going missing? Evangeline, someone else applied. Heard she ran away before her wedding. Ashfords had men searching everywhere. Colt nodded slowly, as if pieces were falling into place. That would explain why she was alone, and why she was heading south, away from Silver Creek. He paused, adding detail to make it real. She was wearing a fancy dress under a coat, not the kind of clothes you'd travel in, like she left in a hurry. The crowd murmured, creating the story among themselves. Colt let them do it, let them fill in gaps with their own assumptions. People believed stories more readily when they felt like they'd help construct them. Dutch handed the necklace back carefully. You buried them? Had to. Ground was frozen, but I managed to dig deep enough. Couldn't just leave them exposed, and I couldn't transport them to town, not after. He trailed off again, letting them imagine the state of bodies that had been frozen and thawed. Where's the marshal? He'll need to know. Marshal Tom Bridger was fetched from his office down the street, and Colt repeated the story. Bridger listened carefully, his weathered face grave. Show me where you buried them. This was the moment that mattered most. If Bridger insisted on exhuming the bodies, the whole lie would collapse. But Colt had counted on the marshal being practical. It's on my property, northeast corner near the tree line. 2 graves marked with stones. But Marshall, they've been in the ground 2 weeks in freezing weather. There's nothing to see that would... Bridger held up a hand. I understand. And honestly, Colt, digging them up would serve no purpose except to disturb their rest. You've got the necklace for identification. That's enough. Relief washed through Colt, but he kept it off his face. What about notifying the family? I'll send word to Raymond Ashford, Bridger said. He's the one who's been searching. This'll be hard news, but at least he'll have answers. He clapped Colt on the shoulder. You did right by them, giving them a proper burial. Not everyone would have done that. By noon, the story had spread through Redemption Ridge like wildfire. By evening, it had reached the surrounding ranches. And by the next morning, Garrett Kane was riding hard toward Colt's property with 3 men behind him. Colt had been expecting this. He was in the barn repairing tack when he heard the hoofbeats approach. He set down his tools slowly, stepped outside, and waited. Kane dismounted first, his face hard and suspicious. You Colt Brennan? I am. I'm Garrett Kane, working for Raymond Ashford. Heard you found his daughter. Colt nodded toward the tree line. Found someone wearing Ashford jewelry. Marshall identified it as belonging to Evangeline Ashford. She's buried over there with her baby. Kane's eyes narrowed. Show me. They walked in silence to the graves Colt had dug. 2 mounds of frozen earth, each marked with a rough stone cross. The ground looked appropriately disturbed, the kind of digging that came from necessity rather than ceremony. Kane stared at the graves for a long moment. How'd you find them? Colt repeated his story, keeping the details consistent. Kane listened without interrupting, but his body language screamed skepticism. When Colt finished, Kane turned to face him directly. Convenient that you found them right after the storm, before anyone else could see them. Convenient would have been finding them alive. Colt shot back, letting irritation color his voice. I don't feel lucky about burying a woman and baby on Christmas. And you just happen to have Ashford jewelry to prove who she was. I've got nothing to prove, Colt said coldly. I reported what I found to the marshal. If you don't believe me, take it up with him. Kane circled the grave slowly, looking for something, any inconsistency, any sign of deception. But Colt had been careful. The graves were the right size, the right depth. The disturbed earth looked weeks old, not freshly dug. And the necklace had been genuine Ashford property. Finally, Kane straightened. Mr. Ashford will want to see the jewelry. Marshall has it, Colt said, part of the official report. That was true. He'd left the necklace with Bridger as evidence. Kane would have to go through proper channels to retrieve it, which meant more time, more witnesses, more legitimacy to the story. Kane mounted his horse, but his eyes remained suspicious. If I find out you're lying, Brennan, you'll regret it. I'm not the one who sent a woman and baby out into a blizzard, Colt replied quietly. Maybe direct your anger at whoever made her run in the first place. It was a calculated risk, implying Raymond Ashford's culpability. But it worked. Kane's face darkened, and he wheeled his horse around without another word. His men followed, and Colt watched them ride away until they disappeared over the horizon. Then he walked back to the house on legs that felt like water. Inside, Evangeline was pressed against the wall beside the window. Grace clutched her chest. She'd heard every word through the thin walls. "Did he believe you?" she whispered. Colt sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. Enough. Or at least, he doesn't have proof to challenge the story. He looked at her, seeing the fear still etched in her face. "But Evangeline, your father's going to want more than a marshal's report. Kane will tell him everything, and Raymond Ashford's going to want to see that grave himself. When he comes, and he will come, you need to be invisible, not just hidden. Invisible." She nodded, understanding the weight of what he was saying. The lie had bought them time, but hadn't eliminated the danger. It had only changed its shape. That night, as Evangeline lay in the darkness with Grace sleeping beside her, she thought about the two graves on Colt's property, about the person she used to be, now officially dead and buried, and she wondered if he could truly kill the past, or if it always found a way to dig itself up. Raymond Ashford received the news while sitting in his study, surrounded by paperwork that no longer mattered. Kane stood in front of his desk, hat in hand, delivering his report with the careful neutrality of a man who knew he was bringing unwelcome information. "Found her, sir. Or rather, found where she ended up. Rancher named Colt Brennan. Discovered her body and the babies in his barn. They froze to death in the Christmas Eve storm. He buried them on his property." Raymond's face remained perfectly still, but inside, something cold and furious shifted. "You saw the bodies?" "Saw the graves. They've been in the ground 2 weeks. Brennan had her necklace, the one with the Ashford crest. Marshall confirmed it was genuine." Raymond stood slowly, walked to the window, and stared out at Silver Creek spreading below his mansion. Dead. His daughter was dead, taking with her any chance of salvaging the Thornton alliance, any hope of maintaining his reputation. The scandal would be enormous. The Ashford daughter dying alone in a barn like some vagrant, pregnant, and unmarried. Every family in the territory would whisper about it. "This rancher," Raymond said quietly. "Tell me about him." Kane shifted his weight. "Widower. Been running the Holbrook Ranch alone for 3 years. Keeps to himself, pays his bills, doesn't cause trouble. No reason to suspect he's lying. Except that my daughter ended up dead on his property. She ended up dead because she ran away into a blizzard." Kane countered carefully. "That's not Brennan's fault." Raymond turned from the window, his eyes cold. "I want to see the graves myself. Today." Kane had expected this. "It's a half-day ride to Redemption Ridge, sir, and the ground's frozen solid." "If you're thinking about exhuming the bodies, I'm thinking," Raymond interrupted, his voice sharp as glass, "that something about this entire situation feels wrong. My daughter runs away, gets caught in a storm, and just happens to die in a barn belonging to a man nobody knows? Too convenient." By noon, Raymond was riding toward Redemption Ridge with Kane and 4 other men. Constance had protested his leaving, worried about his health, his reputation, the propriety of personally investigating something the marshal had already confirmed. But Raymond had silenced her with a look. He hadn't built his empire by accepting other people's conclusions. He needed to see for himself, needed to look at those graves and know with certainty that Evangeline was truly gone. The ride was cold and miserable. Snow began to fall again as they crossed into less settled territory. Raymond's fury kept him warm, burning in his chest like coals. If his daughter was dead, someone would pay for it. And if she wasn't, if this was some elaborate deception, then everyone involved would learn what happened to people who made a fool of Raymond Ashford. They reached Colt's ranch as afternoon shadows were lengthening. The property was modest but well-maintained, the kind of place that spoke of hard work and careful management. Raymond dismounted and walked toward the house without waiting for invitation. Colt appeared in the doorway, his expression neutral. He'd been expecting this visit ever since Cain left. Mr. Ashford. Raymond studied him with the cold assessment of a predator sizing up prey. You're the man who found my daughter. I found someone I believe was your daughter. Yes, I'm sorry for your loss. The sympathy sounded genuine, which only irritated Raymond more. He'd always been able to tell when people were lying to him, and this rancher's grief seemed real. Show me the graves. Colt led them toward the tree line, without argument. Behind him, Raymond heard his men muttering among themselves, saw them noting the layout of the property. If there was evidence of deception here, they'd find it. The graves were exactly as Cain had described. 2 mounds of frozen earth, marked with simple crosses. Raymond stood over them, rage and something like grief warring in his chest. Dig them up? Colt's expression hardened. No, that's my daughter in there, Raymond said, his voice dangerous. I have a right. You have rights over the living, Colt interrupted. The dead deserve peace. And digging up bodies that have been frozen and thawed does nothing but desecrate what's left of them. I want proof she's actually dead. You have the necklace. You have the marshal's report. You have my word. Colt's voice was steady. But more than that, Mr. Ashford, you have to ask yourself why your daughter was running in the first place. Why she'd rather risk death in a blizzard than stay in your house. The words hit like a physical blow. Raymond's face flushed with fury. You don't know anything about my family. I know she was terrified, Colt said quietly. I know she was pregnant and alone. And I know she died trying to escape whatever you were planning for her. Raymond's hand moved toward his gun, but Cain stepped forward quickly. Sir, this isn't the way. For a long moment, Raymond stood frozen, fury making his vision narrow. Then slowly he stepped back. You're protecting someone, he said, his voice deadly calm. I don't know how, but I know you are, and when I prove it, you'll hang. Colt's expression didn't change. The only thing I'm protecting is the dignity of the dead. If that bothers you, take it up with God. Raymond wanted to order his men to tear the property apart, to dig up those graves and prove his instincts were right. But he was surrounded by witnesses on another man's property, with no legal authority to do anything. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered that maybe Cain was right. Maybe Evangeline really had died out here, alone and afraid. Maybe this was exactly what it looked like. He turned away from the graves, his jaw so tight it ached. If I find out you're lying, Brennan, I'll destroy everything you have. Then I guess it's lucky I'm telling the truth, Colt replied evenly. Raymond mounted his horse, and his men followed suit. As they rode away, he looked back once at the small ranch, at the man standing near those graves with his arms crossed. Something about this wasn't right. He could feel it in his bones. But without proof, without bodies, without anything but instinct, he was powerless. The ride back to Silver Creek was silent. Raymond's mind churned through possibilities, scenarios, ways Evangeline could have survived and escaped. But with each mile, the reality settled heavier on his shoulders. His daughter was gone. His reputation was ruined. And the empire he'd built through intimidation and control was crumbling because he'd tried to control the one person who'd finally found the courage to break free. Inside Colt's house, Evangeline emerged from the hidden space behind the cabinet, her whole body shaking. She'd heard everything through the walls, heard her father's voice for the first time in weeks, heard the barely restrained violence in his tone. Grace whimpered, sensing her mother's fear. Colt came inside and found them both trembling. "It's over," he said gently. "He's gone." But Evangeline looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "It's not over. He'll be back. Men like my father never let go." Colt didn't argue, because deep down he knew she was right. 3 months passed before Evangeline truly believed she might be safe. The snows melted. Spring arrived with wildflowers carpeting the meadows, and Grace grew from a fragile newborn into a baby who smiled and cooed at the world. Life on Colt's ranch settled into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Evangeline had stopped jumping at every sound, stopped expecting her father's men to appear at the door. Word from Silver Creek confirmed that Raymond Ashford had gone into mourning, wearing black and accepting condolences from the community. Whether he truly believed she was dead or was simply maintaining appearances, the result was the same. He'd stopped searching. Evangeline could finally breathe without fear crushing her lungs. She'd begun helping more with the ranch work, learning to manage chickens, tend the vegetable garden, and handle the practical realities of frontier life. Her hands, once soft and decorative, had developed calluses. Her skin had browned from hours in the sun. She barely recognized herself in the mirror, and she liked the stranger staring back. Someone stronger, more capable, more real. Colt had given her space to heal and find herself, never pushing for more than she could give. But as the weeks passed, something subtle shifted between them. Conversations lingered longer over evening meals. Glances held a beat too long. When Grace fell asleep in his arms one evening, and Evangeline saw the tenderness on his face, her heart did something complicated and unexpected. She wasn't ready for anything romantic, might never be ready after Carter's betrayal, but she recognized the beginning of something deeper than gratitude, something that felt like belonging. One morning in late March, a rider appeared on the horizon, and Evangeline's old fear surged back. But Colt recognized the horse immediately. "It's just Dutch from the general store, probably bringing supplies." Dutch dismounted with a friendly wave, carrying a package wrapped in brown paper. "Colt, got your order, and some news from town you might want to hear." Evangeline stayed inside, watching through the window. Dutch's back was to her, but she could see Colt's face, see the way his expression shifted from casual to concerned. After Dutch left, Colt came inside and set the package on the table. "Raymond Ashford died last week. Heart attack, according to the doctor. His widow is selling the estate and moving back east." Evangeline sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. Dead. Her father was actually dead. She waited for relief, for grief, for something. What she felt was complicated and messy, sorrow for a relationship they'd never had, anger at the control he'd wielded, and underneath it all, a strange kind of freedom. "Is it really over?" she whispered. Colt nodded. "There's no one left come looking. The Ashford name is finished in Silver Creek. Constance wants nothing to do with the territory, and Harold Thornton married someone else last month. You're safe, Evangeline, truly safe." The words unlocked something in her chest, and she started crying, great, heaving sobs that came from months of fear and tension finally releasing. Grace fussed at the sound, and Evangeline picked her up, holding her daughter close while tears streamed down her face. Colt stood awkwardly nearby, clearly wanting to help but unsure how. Finally, Evangeline reached out and grabbed his hand. "Thank you," she said through her tears, "for everything, for saving us, for protecting us, for giving us a life when we had nothing." He squeezed her hand gently. "You gave me something too. This house, it was dead before you came. Just me and memories. You and Grace, you brought it back to life." Over the following weeks, they talked about the future more openly. Evangeline couldn't stay hidden forever. Eventually, she'd need to exist in the world, to give Grace a life that included other people and experiences. But the question remained, who would she be? She couldn't use the Ashford name, couldn't risk anyone connecting her to the daughter who'd supposedly died. Colt suggested she become Eva Brennan, his cousin from back east who'd come west after losing her husband. It was simple, believable, and explained Grace's existence. People in Redemption Ridge had seen Colt briefly when he first moved to the territory, but few knew his family history. The lie would hold. In May, Evangeline made her first trip to town as Eva Brennan. She wore simple clothes, her hair pulled back practically, her whole appearance transformed from the refined girl who'd fled Silver Creek. Dutch introduced her around the general store, and people welcomed her warmly. Several women complimented Grace, admired her dark eyes and infectious smile. By the time they returned home, Evangeline felt lighter than she had in years. She was building something new, a life based on truth instead of lies, on choices instead of obligation. That evening, while Grace slept and the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples, Evangeline and Colt sat on the porch together. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the sounds of evening birds and the distant lowing of cattle. "I never thought I'd be happy," Evangeline said quietly. "Growing up in that house, I thought happiness was something other people got, something I'd have to settle for watching instead of having." Colt didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his voice was thoughtful. "Martha used to say that happiness isn't something you find. It's something you build, one choice at a time." Evangeline looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd saved her life, protected her when he had no reason to, given her and Grace a home without asking for anything in return. He'd shown her what goodness looked like, what real strength was. Not the dominating control her father had wielded, but the quiet courage of showing up every day and doing what was right. "Colt," she began, then stopped, unsure how to say what she was feeling. He turned to her, and in the fading light, his eyes were kind. "You don't have to say anything, Evangeline. I know this is complicated. I know you've been through hell. I'm not expecting—" "I want to stay," she interrupted, "not just for safety, not just because I have nowhere else to go. I want to build something here, with you, if you'll have us." The vulnerability in her voice surprised even her, but it felt right. For the first time in her life, she was choosing something for herself, not running from one trap into another. She was choosing a future instead of just escaping a past. Colt's expression softened into something that looked like wonder. "I'd like that, more than you know." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture gentle and full of unspoken promise. "We'll take it slow, build it right. No rushing, no pressure. Just see where it goes." Slow sounds perfect, Evangeline agreed. That night, lying in bed with Grace tucked safely beside her, Evangeline thought about the path that had led her here. The fear, the desperation, the moment she thought she and her daughter would freeze to death in that barn. And then the miracle of Colt's lantern, his voice, his unexpected kindness. She'd lost everything, her name, her past, any connection to the life she'd once known. But in losing it, she'd found something infinitely more valuable. She'd found herself. She'd found safety. And she was beginning to find love. Not the reckless, irresponsible kind that had gotten her pregnant and abandoned, but the steady, deep kind that built foundations strong enough to last. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in Silver Creek, the Ashford mansion stood empty. But here, in this small ranch house, a new family was beginning. Imperfect, unconventional, born from tragedy and survival, but real, and finally, blessedly, free. Summer arrived with heat that shimmered off the prairie, and with it came changes that transformed the ranch from just a place to stay into something that felt like home. Evangeline, even now, to everyone except Colt in private moments, had fully embraced her new identity. She'd learned to rope cattle, mend fences, and shoot a rifle well enough to protect the property from coyotes. Her hands were tough, her face sun-kissed, and when she caught her reflection in the water trough, she saw someone unrecognizable from a frightened girl who'd fled Silver Creek. Grace had become the ranch's sunshine, crawling everywhere with determined curiosity. She'd pull herself up on fence posts, babble conversations with the chickens, and light up whenever Colt appeared. He'd taken to fatherhood with surprising naturalness. Patient when Grace fussed, playful when she was happy, protective in ways that made Evangeline's heart ache with gratitude. They'd never formally discussed what they were to each other, but action spoke louder than words. Colt had built a proper cradle for Grace, carved with flowers and hummingbirds that reminded Evangeline of her mother's brooch. He'd expanded the garden so Eva would have more vegetables to preserve. And sometimes in the evenings, he'd play his harmonica while Grace clapped off rhythm and Eva sang softly along. In late June, they made their first trip to town as a family. Dutch organized a community dance to celebrate summer, and half the territory showed up. Eva had been nervous about the crowds, worried someone might recognize her despite the months of transformation. But as they entered the barn decorated with lanterns and wildflowers, she realized she'd become invisible in the best possible way. No one looked at her and saw Raymond Ashford's daughter. They saw Eva Brennan, Colt's hardworking cousin, who brought life back to his lonely ranch. Sarah Cross, the boarding house owner, approached with a warm smile. "Eva, so glad you came. And little Grace is getting so big." She tickled Grace's chin, earning a delighted giggle. "You're doing wonderful things for Colt. Haven't seen him this happy in years." Eva glanced at Colt, who was talking with some ranchers near the refreshment table. He caught her looking and smiled, and something warm bloomed in her chest. "He's been good to us," she said simply. The dance was everything Eva had never experienced in Silver Creek. Genuine warmth instead of social performance, laughter instead of judgment, acceptance instead of scrutiny. People asked about her life back east, and she'd rehearsed the story enough that it flowed naturally. She'd been married young, widowed young, come west for a fresh start. Tragic, but not unusual in a territory where life was hard and death came easy. When the music started, Colt appeared at her elbow. "Dance!" Grace was being passed around by the women, all of them doting on the baby. So Eva was free. She hesitated. She'd been trained in formal ballroom dancing, the kind that required perfect posture and precise steps. This was different, rough and energetic, couples spinning and laughing. "I don't know how," she admitted. "Neither do half the people here," Colt said with a grin. "That's the point." He led her onto the floor, and for the first few minutes, Eva was stiff and awkward. But then she stopped thinking, stopped worrying, and just moved. Colt was a better dancer than she expected, guiding her through the steps with easy confidence. When he spun her, she laughed, a real, unguarded sound she barely recognized as her own. "See," he said, "not so scary." She looked up at him, breathless and happy, and saw something shift in his expression. The playfulness faded into something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken. He pulled her slightly closer, and she didn't pull away. They danced 3 more songs before Grace's fussing pulled them apart. But for the rest of the evening, Eva felt different, lighter, more alive, like she was finally living instead of just surviving. On the ride home, with Grace asleep between them and stars spread like diamonds overhead, Colt cleared his throat. Been thinking about something. What's that? This arrangement we have, it works. But people are starting to ask questions. Why my cousin lives with me? Why we're not properly married if we're raising Grace together? Eva's stomach tightened. She'd known this conversation would come eventually. What are you saying? Colt was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I'm saying we could make it real. Not just a story for the town, but a real marriage, if you wanted. Her breath caught. Colt, I know it's fast, he continued. I know you've been through hell, and maybe you're not ready. But Eva, these last few months, they've been the best I've had since Martha died. You and Grace, you've given me a reason to wake up excited instead of just going through motions. And I think maybe I've been good for you too. He had been more than good. He'd been everything she had known she needed. Steady, kind, protective without being controlling. With him, she felt safe in a way she'd never experienced, not even as a child. But marriage meant vulnerability, meant trusting someone with everything. And the last man she'd trusted had abandoned her the moment things got difficult. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. Of what? Of making another mistake. Of choosing wrong again. She paused, then pushed forward with brutal honesty. Of losing this. What we have now, it's good. What if making it official ruins everything? Colt pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. The moonlight caught the angles of his face, and his eyes were impossibly gentle. Eva, I'm not Carter. I won't run when things get hard. I won't abandon you when life gets complicated. I've already chosen you. Chose you that night in the barn when I decided to protect you instead of turning you over to your father. Chose you every day since then. His voice was rough with emotion. Marriage doesn't change what's already in my heart. It just makes it official. Tears pricked Eva's eyes. What if I can't love you the way Martha did? What if I'm too broken? You're not broken, he said firmly. You're healing. There's a difference. He reached out and took her hand. And I'm not asking you to love me the way Martha did. I'm asking you to love me the way Eva does. However that looks, whatever that means, I'll take it. The simplicity of his words, the complete acceptance in his voice, broke something open inside her. All her life, she'd been measured against impossible standards. Her father's expectations, society's rules, her own fears of inadequacy. But Colt was offering something different. He was offering to take her exactly as she was, scars and all, and build something new together. Ask me properly, she whispered. A smile tugged at his lips. He climbed down from the wagon, came around her side, and knelt in the dust beside the wheel. Grace stirred slightly but didn't wake. Eva Brennan, he said, and the name that started as a lie now felt more real than anything she'd been called before. Will you marry me? Will you let me be Grace's father and your husband? Will you build a life with me, whatever that life looks like? She looked down at him, this good, steady man who'd saved her life and then given her a reason to live it. Yes, she said, and the word felt like freedom. Yes, I'll marry you. He stood and pulled her into his arms, and for the first time since Carter had abandoned her, Eva let herself be held without fear. His embrace was warm and solid, promising safety without demanding surrender. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. We'll do it right. Proper wedding, proper vows. I want everyone to know you're mine, and I'm yours. Not too fancy. Eva said quickly, old anxiety surfacing. Nothing like Silver Creek. Nothing like Silver Creek, he agreed. Just us, Grace, and the people who matter. Simple and real. They climbed back in the wagon and continued home, and Eva felt something she thought was lost forever. Hope, not the desperate, grasping hope of escape, but the quiet, solid hope of building something that would last. Over the next 2 weeks, they prepared. Sarah Cross helped Eva sew a simple white dress, and Dutch spread the word to Redemption Ridge that there would be a wedding. The local preacher, a kind man named Father Morrison, agreed to perform the ceremony at the ranch. Eva had worried about questions about her past, but no one seemed suspicious. Widows remarrying was common in the territory, and Colt was well-liked enough that people were simply happy for him. The night before the wedding, Eva sat on the porch with Grace in her lap, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Colt emerged from the barn and joined her, settling into the chair beside hers. Nervous, he asked. Terrified, she admitted, but in a good way, like standing on the edge of something beautiful and scary at the same time. He reached over and took her hand. I'm scared too. Scared I won't be enough. Scared I'll let you down somehow. But I figure if we're scared together, that's better than being scared alone. Eva squeezed his hand. Together sounds perfect. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell and stars emerged. Grace had fallen asleep, her tiny hand curled against Eva's chest. This, Eva thought, this is what happiness feels like. Not the absence of fear or pain, but the presence of something stronger than both. Colt, she said quietly. Yeah. Thank you for everything. For that night in the barn. For protecting us. For giving me a chance to become someone new. You didn't just save my life. You gave me a life worth living. His voice was thick when he responded. You gave me the same thing, Eva. You and Grace, you brought me back from just existing. Made me remember what it feels like to have a family, to have purpose beyond just work and survival. He paused. Martha would have liked you, would have loved what you've become. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of perfect summer day that felt like a blessing. Eva dressed in her simple white gown, while Sarah helped arrange wildflowers in her hair. Grace wore a tiny dress that Sarah had stitched from scraps, looking like a miniature princess. When Eva emerged from the house, she found Colt waiting near the garden they'd planted together. He'd cleaned up his Sunday best pressed, and his hair still damp from washing. When he saw her, his expression transformed into something that made her heart skip. You're beautiful, he said, his voice rough with emotion. The ceremony was short and sweet. Father Morrison spoke about love and commitment, about building lives together through good times and hard. When it came time for vows, Colt's voice was steady and sure. I promise to protect you and Grace with everything I have, to be faithful, honest, and kind, to build a home where you feel safe and loved, to be a father to Grace and a husband to you, for all the days I'm given. Eva's voice shook, but she meant every word. I promise to be your partner and friend, to work beside you, support you, and choose you every day, to build a life with you that's real and true, to let you into my heart, even when I'm scared, for all the days I'm given. When Father Morrison pronounced them married, Colt kissed her gently, and the small crowd of neighbors erupted in cheers. Grace clapped her hands, not understanding but catching the joy in the air. There was food and dancing, laughter and celebration. Dutch played his fiddle while children ran through the garden and adults told stories. As the sun set and people began heading home, Eva found herself standing with Colt near the porch steps, Grace asleep on her shoulder. "Mrs. Brennan," Colt said with a smile, "how does that sound?" Eva considered it. She'd been Evangeline Ashford, a name that represented control and fear. She'd become Eva Brennan, a name that represented escape and survival. But now she was Eva Brennan in truth, chosen and real. "It sounds like home," she said. That night, after Grace was settled in her cradle and the house was quiet, Eva and Colt stood together in what was now their shared bedroom. The intimacy was new and slightly terrifying, but when he pulled her close, she felt only rightness. "We'll figure out," he whispered against her hair. "All of it together." And as Eva drifted asleep in her husband's arms, with her daughter breathing softly nearby, she thought about the Christmas Eve that had changed everything. The desperate flight through the snow, the moment she thought they would die, the miracle of Colt's lantern appearing in the darkness. She'd lost everything to gain everything, and she wouldn't change a single moment. By October, the ranch had transformed from Colt's property into their home. Eva had painted the shutters a cheerful blue, planted roses near the porch that would bloom next spring, and filled the windows with curtains she'd sewn from fabric Dutch ordered special. Grace had started walking, her unsteady steps taking her everywhere, investigating every corner of her world with fearless curiosity. Eva watched her daughter grow stronger and braver each day, and saw none of Raymond Ashford's cruelty in her features. Only joy and wonder. The harvest season kept them busy from dawn to dusk. Eva had learned to preserve vegetables, smoke meat, and prepare for the harsh winter ahead. Her hands, once soft and useless, now moved with the confidence of someone who knew how to survive. She'd become friends with several women in Redemption Ridge, particularly Sarah Cross and a young mother named Helen Wells whose son was a few months older than Grace. They'd share recipes, watch each other's children, and talk about their lives with honesty Eva had never experienced in Silver Creek's rigid social circles. One afternoon in late October, Eva and Helen were hanging laundry while Grace and little Thomas played in the dirt nearby. Helen had been sharing gossip from town, who was courting whom, which rancher had gotten drunk and made a fool of himself at the saloon. Then she paused, her expression turning cautious. "Eva, can I ask you something personal?" Eva's stomach tightened, old fears surfacing. "Of course. You and Colt, you seem so happy. But sometimes I see something in your eyes, like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, like you don't quite believe this is real." Helen's voice was gentle, concerned rather than prying. "Are you all right? Really all right?" For a moment, Eva considered deflecting, maintaining the careful walls she'd built. But Helen had become a true friend, and the isolation of keeping secrets was exhausting. "I'm learning to be all right," Eva said carefully. "My first marriage wasn't good, and I spent a long time being scared. Sometimes that fear still catches up with me. It was true, if not the whole truth." Helen nodded understanding. "My first beau was cruel, used his fists when he was drinking. I ran from him, came west, and found Thomas's father. Thought I'd never trust a man again. But here I am, married to the gentlest soul I've ever met." She squeezed Eva's hand. "It gets easier. The fear gets quieter. You'll see." The conversation stayed with Eva for days. Helen was right. The fear was getting quieter. There were whole hours now when she forgot to be vigilant, forgot to listen for approaching riders or plan escape routes. She was learning to simply exist without constantly bracing for disaster. But then in early November, a stranger rode into Redemption Ridge asking questions, and Eva's careful piece shattered like glass. Colt heard about it from Dutch when he went to town for supplies. The man had been showing a sketch around, asking if anyone had seen a woman matching the description. The sketch was crude, but the details were specific. Dark hair, early 20s, traveling with a baby. Said he was a detective hired by a family back east. Dutch reported, his expression worried, looking for a missing relative. But Colt, the description, it could be Eva. Colt's blood ran cold. He thought they were safe, thought Raymond's death had ended the threat. But apparently someone was still looking. What did you tell him? Nothing, Dutch said firmly. Told him I hadn't seen anyone like that. But he's still in town, and he's persistent. You need to warn her. Colt rode home faster than was wise, his mind racing through options. When he burst through the door, Eva was kneading bread dough while Grace napped in her cradle. She took one look at his face and went pale. What happened? He told her everything, watching her expression shift from fear to something harder, more determined. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. It's Constance, she said finally. It has to be. She inherited everything when my father died. If I'm alive, I could contest a will, claim my share of the estate. She needs me to stay dead. Or she needs proof you're actually dead, Colt said grimly. Either way, we have a problem. Eva looked at Grace, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the danger circling closer. We could run, leave the ranch, go somewhere no one knows us. We could, Colt agreed. But Eva, running means giving up everything we built, and there's no guarantee he won't follow. These detective types are like bloodhounds. They don't give up easy. Eva's hands clenched into fists. Flour dusted her knuckles. I'm so tired of running. Tired of being afraid. This is our home. Grace deserves to grow up here, not bouncing from town to town like criminals. Then we need a different plan, Colt said. Something permanent. They talked for hours, turning over possibilities. They could confront the detective, claim Eva was someone else entirely. They could have the marshal verify her identity as Eva Brennan, Colt's cousin. They could fabricate documents proving her story. But every option felt flimsy, vulnerable to someone determined enough to dig. Finally, Eva made a decision. I need to go to Silver Creek. Colt's eyes widened. Absolutely not. That's the only way to end this, she interrupted. Face Constance directly. Make her understand that I want nothing from the Ashford estate. Sign whatever papers she needs. Renounce any claim to the inheritance. Give her what she wants so she'll stop looking. It's too dangerous, Colt argued. What if she has you arrested? Claims you're disturbed or unstable. What if she tries to take Grace? Eva's expression hardened with a determination Colt had never seen before. Then we fight. But Colt, I can't keep living in fear that someone will recognize me, that our life will be ripped away at any moment. I need to face this, end it properly, so we can truly move forward. He understood, even as everything in him screamed to keep her hidden and safe. She wasn't the frightened girl he'd found in the barn anymore. She'd grown into someone stronger, someone who faced her fears instead of just running from them. Then we go together, he said finally. You, me, and Grace. We face this as a family. Eva's eyes filled with tears. You do that? Risk everything. I've been risking everything since the night I lied to Kane about those graves, Colt said. In for a penny, in for a pound. He pulled her close. Besides, you're my wife. Where you go, I go. That's what the vows meant. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Colt left the ranch in the care of a trusted neighboring rancher, told Dutch they'd be gone for a week on family business, and made sure their story was airtight. They'd be visiting Eva's childhood home back east, settling some affairs. Nothing suspicious, nothing that would invite questions. The ride to Silver Creek took 3 days. Eva had insisted they take the wagon so Grace would be more comfortable, which meant slower travel but gave them time to plan. With each mile closer to her former home, Eva felt old memories rising, walking these roads with her mother before she died, the Christmas parties her father had forced her to attend, the suffocating weight of social expectations. But she also felt different. She wasn't the same person who'd fled in terror. She was stronger now, toughened by hardship and empowered by choice. When Silver Creek came into view, Colt reached over and squeezed her hand. "You ready?" Eva looked at the town that had once been her prison, then at Grace sleeping peacefully in the back of the wagon, then at Colt beside her, solid and steady and completely hers. "I'm ready," she said, and she meant it. They found lodging at a modest inn on the edge of town, registering as Mr. and Mrs. Brennan from Redemption Ridge. The innkeeper didn't recognize Eva, which wasn't surprising. She looked nothing like the pampered Ashford daughter anymore. That evening, while Colt stayed with Grace, Eva walked alone through Silver Creek streets. Everything was familiar yet alien, like visiting a place from a dream. She passed a general store where she used to buy ribbons and fancy soaps, the church where her mother was buried, the park where she played as a child. Finally, she stood at the bottom of the hill, looking up at the Ashford mansion. It looked smaller than she remembered, less imposing. Just a house, after all, not a fortress, not a prison, just wood and stone and the ghosts of bad memories. Tomorrow, she would climb that hill and face Constance. She would reclaim her narrative, sign away her claim to blood money, and finally be free. Tonight, she said goodbye to Evangeline Ashford one last time. That girl was gone, buried not in Colt's property, but in the past where she belonged. Eva Brennan walked back to the inn with her head high, ready for whatever came next. The Ashford mansion looked different in daylight, still imposing, but diminished somehow. Eva stood at the front door with Colt beside her and Grace on her hip, her heart hammering but her resolve steady. She'd sent a note ahead requesting a meeting with Constance Ashford regarding family matters, signed Eva Brennan. She hadn't explained who she was or what she wanted, and she knew the mystery would intrigue Constance enough to grant the meeting. The door opened, revealing a servant Eva didn't recognize. Her father must have replaced the entire staff after her disappearance. "Mrs. Brennan?" the young woman asked. "Mrs. Ashford is expecting you. Please follow me." They were led through familiar hallways that felt foreign now, past furniture Eva remembered but no longer cared about, into the sitting room where Constance received guests. The woman herself sat near the window, wearing black mourning clothes that looked expensive even in grief. She was thinner than Eva remembered, her face pinched with stress. When Constance looked up and saw Eva, the color drained from her face. Her teacup rattled against its saucer, and for a moment she couldn't speak. "You're dead," she finally whispered. "I'm not," Eva said calmly, stepping fully into the room. "Though I understand why you prefer I was." Constance stood abruptly, her composure fracturing. "How is this possible?" There were bodies, graves, jewelry, all carefully arranged. Eva interrupted. "I'm not here to explain how I survived or where I've been. I'm here to end this." She gestured to Colt and Grace. "This is my husband, Colt Brennan, and my daughter, Grace. We've built a life in Redemption Ridge, and we want to keep it. But we can't do that with detectives asking questions and people looking for a dead woman. Constance's shock was giving way to something harder. Calculation mixed with fear. If people find out you're alive, if you make a claim on this estate, I don't want anything from this estate. Eva said firmly, not a single dollar, not a piece of furniture, nothing. You can have it all. I just need you to stop looking for me. Constance sank back into her chair, studying Eva with suspicious eyes. Why would you give up a fortune? Because it's blood money, Eva said quietly, built on cruelty and control. I don't want any part of it. I want my life in Redemption Ridge, my family, my freedom. That's worth more than any inheritance. She could see Constance processing this, trying to find a trap or trick, but there wasn't one. Eva genuinely wanted nothing from her old life except to be left alone. What do you want from me? Constance asked finally. Legal documents. Eva said, something stating that Evangeline Asher renounces all claims to the Asher estate, that she has no interest in contesting her father's will. I'll sign whatever you need, have it notarized, make it ironclad. In exchange, you call off your detective and agree to let the world believe I died in that barn. Constance was quiet for a long moment. And if I refuse? If I simply have you arrested for fraud or theft? Colt spoke for the first time, his voice low and dangerous. Then we go public with everything. Tell the whole territory how Raymond Ashford tried to force his daughter into marriage with a man twice her age, how she fled in terror, how she nearly died because her own father cared more about a business arrangement than her life. We'll tell them how you hired a detective to hunt her down rather than let her live in peace. He stepped closer. You think the scandal was bad when they thought she was dead? Wait until they find out she survived, and you try to destroy her new life out of greed. Constance's face flushed with anger and fear. She knew he was right. The social consequences would be devastating. Better let sleeping dogs lie. To maintain the fiction that Evangeline had died tragically, than to reveal the ugly truth of what had driven her away. I want insurance, Constance said finally. Something to ensure you won't change your mind in 5 years, 10 years. Decide you want money after all. Eva had anticipated. This, you'll have the legal documents, notarized and binding, and you'll have my word, which is worth more than you think. I've spent months building a life where people trust me, where my word means something. I'm not going to throw that away for money I never wanted. She paused. Besides, if I wanted the Ashford fortune, I would have fought for it already. The fact that I'm here offering to walk away should tell you everything you need to know about my intentions. Constance studied her for a long moment, and Eva saw something shift in her expression. Not quite respect, but perhaps acknowledgement. You've changed, she said quietly. You're not the timid girl who used to hide in corners. No, Eva agreed. I'm not. That girl died in the blizzard. I'm someone new now. Constance nodded slowly. I'll have my lawyer draw up the documents. It will take a few days. We'll wait, Eva said. But Constance, the detective needs to be called off immediately. Today, we can't have him continuing to ask questions while we're still in town. Agreed, Constance said. She rang a bell, and when the servant appeared, she gave instructions to fetch her lawyer and to send a telegram to the detective terminating his services. After the servant left, an awkward silence filled the room. Grace fussed, and Eva bounced her gently, the familiar motion calming them both. Constance watched with an expression Eva couldn't quite read. Is she was a father? Gone, Eva said flatly, before she was born. But she has a father now, the man who chose us, who chose to be her family. Constance looked at Colt, assessing him with critical eyes. You're the rancher who found her. I am, Cole confirmed. And buried her, Constance continued. Lied to everyone, including Raymond's men. Protected her when you had no reason to. I had every reason, Colt said quietly. She needed help and I could give it. That's reason enough. Something flickered across Constance's face. Perhaps envy, perhaps regret. Raymond would have hated you, would have destroyed you if he'd known. Raymond isn't here, Eva said, and we're not asking for your approval, Constance, just your cooperation. Over the next 3 days, they waited in there, and while lawyers drew up documents and Constance arranged for the detective to leave town, Eva ventured out once to visit her mother's grave, standing alone at the headstone, while Colt waited at a respectful distance with Grace. I made it, Mama, Eva whispered to the cold stone. I got out, found a good life, married a good man. I wish you could have met him, met Grace, but I think somehow you'd be proud. She laid wildflowers on the grave and walked away without looking back. On the 4th day, they returned to the mansion. The lawyer was there, an older man named Mr. Peterson, who'd worked for the Ashford family for decades. He recognized Eva immediately, shock registering on his face. Miss Evangeline, Mrs. Brennan, Eva corrected gently. That life is over, Mr. Peterson. He nodded slowly and laid out the documents. They were thorough, legally binding statements that Evangeline Asher renounced all claims to her father's estate, acknowledged no interest in contesting his will, and confirmed she had left of her own free will. In exchange, Constance agreed to maintain the official story of Evangeline's death and to cease all investigations into her whereabouts. Eva read every word carefully, Colt looking over her shoulder. When she was satisfied, she signed with a steady hand, first as Evangeline Ashford, acknowledging her former identity, then as Eva Brennan, claiming her new one. Mr. Peterson notarized the documents, and Constance signed her portion. It was done. Eva Ashford was officially, legally, permanently dead. One more thing, Eva said before they left. She removed her wedding ring, the simple gold band Colt had given her, and handed it to Constance. If anyone ever questions whether Evangeline Ashford died in that barn, you can show them this. Say it was found on her body, that I was already married when I ran. Whatever story makes sense. It's proof if you need it. Constance took the ring, understanding the gift for what it was. Insurance, protection, a final severance of all ties. Thank you, she said quietly, and for once seemed to mean it. They left the mansion for the last time, and Eva felt a weight lift from her shoulders. As they walked down the hill toward their wagon, Colt slipped his hand into hers. How do you feel? She considered the question. Free, she said finally. Actually, truly free. That evening, as they prepared to leave Silver Creek at dawn, they celebrated quietly in their own room. Grace was asleep, and Eva sat by the window watching the town where she'd grown up. Any regrets? Colt asked, joining her. Eva shook her head. Not one. That life, those people, none of it was real. This is real. You, me, Grace, the ranch. Everything else was just pretending. Colt pulled her close. Then let's go home, Mrs. Brennan. Back to our real life. And as Eva settled into his embrace, she realized he was right. Silver Creek had never been home. Home was a small ranch in Redemption Ridge, with chickens in the yard and roses by the porch. Home was the life they'd built together from nothing. Home was wherever they were. Together, they returned to Redemption Ridge in mid-November, just as the first serious snows began to fall. The ranch welcomed them back like an old friend, familiar and comforting. Dutch had kept an eye on the property in their absence, and everything was exactly as they'd left it. That first night home, Eva cooked a simple dinner, while Colt brought in firewood and Grace toddled between them, chattering in her own language. It was ordinary and perfect, the kind of evening Eva had once believed was impossible for someone like her. Over the following weeks, winter settled in with serious intent. Temperatures dropped, snow piled high against the barn, and the world contracted to the small circle of their ranch. But unlike the previous winter, when Eva had been hiding and afraid, this year she felt secure. The legal documents were filed. The detective had left the territory, and Constance had sent one final letter confirming that the Ashford family considered the matter closed. Eva was free in a way she'd never experienced. Not just physically free, but legally, officially, completely free. Christmas approached, and Eva found herself thinking about the previous year. The desperate flight through the blizzard, the moment she thought she and Grace would die, the miracle of Colt's lantern appearing in the darkness. It felt like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. "What are you thinking about?" Colt asked one evening. They were sitting by the fire, Grace asleep in her arms, snow falling steadily outside. "Last Christmas," Eva said, "how much has changed? Regret any of it?" She looked at him, at the life they'd built, at their daughter sleeping peacefully. Not even the scary parts, because they led here to this, to us. Colt smiled and kissed her forehead. "We should celebrate properly this year. Have people over, make it special." Eva hesitated. Last year's Christmas had been trauma and survival. The thought of celebrating felt strange, like tempting fate. But she was tired of letting fear dictate her choices. "I'd like that," she said. "A real Christmas, with friends and joy and all the things I never had growing up." They invited Sarah Cross, Helen and her family, Dutch, and several other friends from town. Eva cooked for days. Roasted turkey, fresh bread, apple pies made from fruit she preserved in the fall. Colt chopped down a small pine tree and set it up in the corner, and together they decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments Grace helped create with her chubby, enthusiastic hands. Christmas Eve arrived clear and cold, the kind of night where the stars seemed close enough to touch. Their guests arrived in the late afternoon, bringing food and laughter and warmth. The small house filled with life. Children playing, adults talking, the smell of good food, and wood smoke. Sarah brought gifts she'd knitted. Hats and mittens for everyone. Dutch played his fiddle while people sang carols. Helen's son Thomas and Grace toddled around together, partners in chaos. It was everything a Christmas should be, loud and messy and full of love. As evening turned to night and people began heading home, Sarah pulled Eva aside. "You look happy," she said with a warm smile. "Truly happy. Whatever shadows you carried when you first came here, they're fading." Eva hugged her friend. They are, finally, after everyone left and Grace was tucked into bed, Eva and Colt stood on the porch watching the snow fall. 1 year ago, Eva had been running for her life through weather just like this, terrified and alone. Now she stood with her husband in front of their home, safe and loved and free. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for that night, for every day since, for giving me a life I never thought I'd have." Colt pulled her close. "Thank you for trusting me, for staying, for building this with me." They stood together in the cold, and Eva felt something click into place. The final piece of healing, the last bit of fear letting go. She was home, truly, completely home. Inside, Grace stirred and called out, and they went to her together, a family in every way that mattered. The Christmas that had once represented Eva's darkest moment had become something new, a marker of transformation, of survival, of the night everything changed for the better. Spring arrived in March with mud and wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. Eva discovered she was pregnant again in early April, and the news filled her with a joy untainted by the fear that had accompanied Grace's pregnancy. This baby would be born into love and safety, would know both parents, would never have to run or hide. Colt was overwhelmed with happiness, already planning to expand the house to accommodate their growing family. Grace, now walking confidently and starting to form real words, seemed to sense the change and became more clingy with Eva, as if she knew she'd soon have to share her mother's attention. The ranch exploded into life as winter retreated. Baby animals were born. The garden needed planting. Fences required mending. Eva worked alongside Colt, her pregnancy barely showing yet, feeling stronger and more capable than ever before. She'd learned so much over the past year, not just practical skills, but emotional ones. She'd learned to trust, to let people in, to believe in happiness instead of just hoping for survival. In May, a letter arrived that threatened to disrupt their peace. It was from Mr. Peterson, the Ashford family lawyer, and Eva's hands shook as she opened it. But inside was not threat or trouble, it was closure. Constance had died suddenly of influenza, the letter explained. In her will, she'd left a small sum to Eva Brennan of Redemption Ridge, in recognition of her grace and forgiveness. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to expand the ranch, to build that addition Colt had been planning, to secure their future. Eva stared at the letter for a long time, feeling complicated emotions. She'd never liked Constance, but they reached an understanding in those final moments at the mansion. Perhaps, in her own way, Constance had been trying to make amends. What do you want to do with it? Colt asked. Eva thought carefully. Use it to build something good, something that helps people. Maybe a school for Redemption Ridge. The children here deserve education. Or a community center where families can gather. Colt smiled. Martha would have loved that idea, using Ashford money to build community instead of empire. They decided on the school, donating the money anonymously through Father Morrison. By fall, construction had begun on a small schoolhouse that would serve the scattered ranching families around Redemption Ridge. Eva took quiet satisfaction in knowing that something good had come from the Ashford fortune, that her father's money was finally being used to help rather than control. As Eva's pregnancy progressed, she found herself reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. She'd gone from being Evangeline Ashford, powerless, trapped, defined by other people's expectations, to Eva Brennan, a woman who'd built her own life through courage and choice. She'd learned that family wasn't about blood or obligation, but about who showed up and chose to stay. Colt had shown up that Christmas Eve in the barn, and he'd chosen to stay every day since. In October, Eva went into labor during the first snowfall of the season. The parallels to Grace's arrival weren't lost on her, but this birth was. Different, safe, planned, surrounded by people who loved her. Helen attended her, along with the town's midwife, while Colt paced anxiously in the next room with Grace on his hip. The labor was long but not difficult, and as dawn broke on a world covered in fresh snow, Eva gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When Colt came in to meet his son, his first biological child, his eyes filled with tears. "He's perfect," he whispered, touching the tiny fingers with wonder. "What should we name him?" Eva looked down at the baby in her arms, at Grace peering curiously from Colt's embrace, at her husband whose kindness had saved them all. "William," she said, "after my mother's father, the only Ashford worth remembering. William Brennan." Colt said, testing out the name, "I like it." He sat beside her on the bed, Grace between them, their new son in Eva's arms. We're a family, a real complete family. Eva looked around at the small bedroom. Nothing like the luxury she'd grown up with, but filled with more love than the Ashford mansion had ever held. We are, she agreed. We really are. Over the next few months, as winter settled in again and their second Christmas approached, Eva found herself marveling at how ordinary life had become. She woke each morning to feed William, help Grace with her breakfast, kiss Cole goodbye as he headed to the barn. She cleaned and cooked, played with her children, visited with friends. It was simple and repetitive and utterly beautiful. Sometimes, late at night when everyone else was asleep, Eva would stand at the window and look out at the snow-covered ranch. She'd think about the girl who'd fled Silver Creek in terror, certain she would die in the cold. That girl had been so afraid, so convinced that happiness was something that happened to other people. Eva wished she could go back and tell her, asterisk, you're going to make it. You're going to find a man who chooses you every single day. You're going to have 2 beautiful children who will never know the fear you carried. You're going to build a life so full of love that the past becomes nothing but a story you barely remember. Asterisk, but maybe that girl had known. Somehow. Maybe that's why she kept fighting through the blizzard, kept Grace warm against her chest, kept moving even when everything seemed hopeless. Maybe she'd sensed that something better was waiting on the other side of that darkness. On Christmas Eve, exactly 2 years after Colt had found her in the barn, Eva insisted they take a walk as a family. Colt carried William bundled in blankets while Grace held Eva's hand, her little boots crunching through the snow. They walked to the barn, the same barn where everything had changed. Why here? Colt asked, though his eyes were understanding. Eva stepped inside, remembering the terror, the cold, the absolute certainty that she and Grace would freeze before morning. And then the miracle of his lantern, his voice, his immediate and unquestioning kindness. This is where I stopped running, she said quietly, where I stopped being Evangeline Ashford and started becoming Eva Brennan, where I found you. She turned to face her family, her husband, her daughter, her son. I want them to know this story someday, not the parts about my father or the fear, but this part, the part where a stranger became our family, where we were saved not just from dying, but from never really living. Colt shifted William to one arm and pulled Eva close to the other. Grace squeezed between them. It's my favorite story, he said. The night my life started over. They stood together in the barn as snow began to fall again, and Eva felt the last piece of her old self finally let go. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was simply living fully and completely in the life she'd chosen. That evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Eva and Colt exchanged gifts by the fireplace. He gave her a beautiful wooden rocking chair he'd spent months building, perfect for nursing William and reading to Grace. She gave him a journal she'd fill with letters, one for each month of their marriage, telling him everything she'd been too scared or too busy to say out loud. How much she loved him, how safe he made her feel, how he'd given her not just a second chance at life, but a first chance at truly living. Colt read the first few letters, his eyes growing bright. Eva, these are everything I wanted you to know, she finished. Everything I was afraid to say in case it disappeared. But I'm not afraid anymore. He set the journal aside carefully and pulled her into his arms. I love you, not because you needed saving, not because of Grace or William or the ranch. I love you because you're brave and strong and you chose this life. Chose me, even when you had every reason to keep running. Best choice I ever made. Eva whispered against his chest. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other while the fire crackled and snow fell softly outside. 2 years ago, Eva had been dying in a barn, convinced her story was ending. She'd had no idea it was just beginning. That Christmas had been a death, in a way. The death of Evangeline Ashford, the death of fear and control and living for others' approval. But it had also been a birth, the birth of Eva Brennan, the birth of courage and choice and a love that asked for nothing but gave everything. As she drifted to sleep that night, safe and warm with her family around her, Eva thought about the question Colt had asked so long ago in this very house. Any regrets? She still didn't have a single one. The spring of Eva's 3rd year in Redemption Ridge brought changes that felt less like disruptions and more like natural growth. William was crawling everywhere, getting into everything, while Grace had become a chatterbox who narrated her entire day in an endless stream of observations. Daddy's in the barn. Chickens are loud. William ate dirt. Mama, why is the sky blue? The schoolhouse they'd funded opened in April, and Eva volunteered to help the new teacher, Miss Catherine Davies, who come all the way from Boston to bring education to the frontier. Catherine was young and idealistic, with more books than practical sense, but Eva liked her immediately. They became friends quickly, bonding over the challenge of teaching children who ranged from 5 to 15, many of whom had never sat in a classroom before. Eva would bring Grace to school days, letting her daughter absorb the lessons while helping Catherine manage the chaos of 20 children with vastly different skill levels. One afternoon, while Eve was helping organize a small library they'd assembled from donated books, Catherine asked a question that had clearly been building for a while. Can I ask you something personal? Eva had learned that this question from friends usually led somewhere meaningful, not dangerous. Of course. How did you do it? Catherine gestured vaguely. Come west alone, build a life from nothing, raise children, manage a ranch. You make it look easy, but it can't be. Eva laughed softly. It's not easy. And I didn't do it alone. I had help from someone who saw me at my worst and chose to help anyway. She paused, considering how much to share. I ran away from a bad situation back east. Lost everything. But I found something better. A partner who treats me like an equal, a community that accepted me, a life I actually chose instead of one that was forced on me. Catherine's eyes were thoughtful. You're brave, braver than me. I came west because it sounded romantic and adventurous. You came because you had no other choice. That's different. Bravery isn't about having choices, Eva said quietly. It's about what you do when you don't have any. You came here to teach children who desperately need education. That's brave, too. The conversation stayed with her as she rode home that evening, Grace chattering beside her about everything she'd learned. Bravery came in different forms. The desperate courage of survival, the quiet courage of showing up every day, the bold courage of starting over. She'd experienced all of them, and none felt more valid than the others. At home, Colt was teaching William to clap his hands, both of them laughing when the baby got the rhythm wrong. Eva stood in the doorway watching them, her heart so full it ached. This was what she'd fought for, run for, risked everything for. Not just survival, but joy. That evening, after the children were in bed, Colt showed Eva the latest ranch accounts. They were doing well, better than well, actually. The cattle had thrived. They'd sold at good prices. And between the ranch income and careful management, they were building real security. I've been thinking, Colt said carefully, about expanding, maybe buying the Morrison property when it comes up for sale next month. It borders ours, would nearly double our land. Eva considered it. More land meant more opportunity, more security for their children's future. But it also meant more work, more risk, more complexity. Can we manage that much property? Not alone, Colt admitted. We'd need to hire help. Maybe find a young couple looking to learn ranching, give them a share of the profits in exchange for labor. It made sense, and Eva found herself excited by the prospect. They'd built something good here. Why not build it bigger? Let's do it, she said. The Morrison property purchase went through in June, and by July they'd hired a young couple named James and Martha Bennett. No relation to Colt's late wife, though the shared name felt oddly fitting. The Bennetts were hard-working and eager to learn, and their presence allowed Eva and Colt to focus more on the children and the business side of ranching. With expansion came new challenges and new rewards. Eva found herself managing more of the ranch's business affairs, negotiating with buyers, tracking expenses, and planning for the future. She discovered she had a head for numbers and strategy, skills she'd never had the chance to develop in Silver Creek, where women were expected to focus on social graces rather than business acumen. By fall, their expanded ranch was thriving, and Eva was pregnant again. This pregnancy felt different from the previous two, easier physically, but emotionally complex. Part of her worried about having 3 children so close together, about dividing her attention too many ways. But mostly she felt grateful for the problem of having too much love to distribute rather than too little. What if it's twins? Colt joked one evening, his hand on her belly. Then we'll need a bigger house, Eva replied with a smile. They were already planning the addition, more bedrooms, a larger kitchen, space for their growing family. It was a far cry from the small cabin that had sheltered her first winter here, when she'd hidden the back room and jumped at every sound. Helen visited in October, bringing news that made Eva's heart ache with happiness. We're building a church, she announced. Father Morrison has been holding services in the schoolhouse, but we've raised enough money for a real church. Small but proper. And Eva, he wants you and Colt to be on the building committee. It was a mark of how fully they'd been accepted into the community, how completely Eva had become part of Redemption Ridge. The girl who'd fled Silver Creek in disgrace was now trusted to help build the town's spiritual center. We'd be honored, Eva said, tears pricking her eyes. That evening, she told Colt about the conversation. Sometimes I can't believe this is my life, that people trust me, respect me, want me involved in important decisions. Colt pulled her close. That's because they see what I see, someone strong and capable and good, someone who's earned their place here. I never earned anything in Silver Creek, Eva said quietly. Everything was given or taken, never earned. This feels different, real. As winter approached again, Eva found herself taking stock of everything that had changed. 3 years ago, she'd been Evangeline Ashford, powerless, trapped, pregnant, and terrified. Now she was Eva Brennan, ranch owner, mother, businesswoman, community member. She'd gone from having no choices to having almost too many, from having no voice to being asked for her opinion, from being someone's daughter to being her own person. The night of the first snowfall, she stood on the porch watching the flakes fall, one hand on her pregnant belly. Colt joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. What are you thinking about? How much I love snow now, she said. I used to hate it, fear it. It represented death and danger. But now it's just beautiful. Just snow. He understood what she wasn't saying. That she'd healed enough to separate the trauma of that Christmas Eve from the simple beauty of winter. That she reclaimed something that had been stolen by fear. "You've come a long way, Eva Brennan," he said softly. She leaned against him, watching their children's toys scattered across the porch, the lights glowing warm from inside their home. "We both have," she replied. Together, the church building project became the center of community life that winter. Every able-bodied person in Redemption Ridge contributed in some way. Men hauling timber and raising walls, women organizing fundraisers and preparing meals for the workers, children helping with small tasks and getting underfoot in ways that were more endearing than useful. Eva threw herself into the project despite her pregnancy, managing schedules and keeping track of supplies. Colt worked on the actual construction, his carpentry skills from building furniture translating well to larger structures. By December, the church walls were up and the roof was on, though the interior remained unfinished. Father Morrison declared it good enough for Christmas services, and the whole town gathered to celebrate in the building they created together. Eva sat between Colt and Sarah, with Grace on her lap, and William dozing against Colt's shoulder. The service was simple but moving. Father Morrison speaking about how community was built through shared effort and how every person's contribution mattered, whether they'd swung a hammer or sewn curtains or simply shown up to encourage others. Looking around, the familiar faces filling the Rawwood pews, Eva felt a profound sense of belonging. These people had welcomed her without knowing her past, had accepted her story without questioning its gaps, had made space for her family in their community. She'd found something in Redemption Ridge that she'd never had in Silver Creek. Not just safety, but genuine connection. After the service, families gathered outside despite the cold, sharing food and conversation. Dutch announced that the saloon would be hosting a New Year's celebration, and several women immediately began planning what they'd bring. Grace tugged on Eva's skirt. "Mama, can we come to the party?" Eva smiled down at her daughter. "Of course we can. It's a family celebration." "Will there be dancing?" Grace asked hopefully. She discovered she loved dancing at the summer festival and had been asking about it ever since. "Probably," Eva said, "though you might be the only one who dances the whole night without getting tired." The New Year's celebration was exactly what Redemption Ridge needed after a long winter. Loud, chaotic, full of laughter and terrible singing and children running wild. Eva, now heavily pregnant, sat with the other expectant mothers and watched the festivities with contentment. At midnight, when everyone gathered to ring in the new year, Colt found Eva in the crowd and kissed her gently. "To new beginnings," he said, "and to old friends," Eva added, looking around the community they'd become part of. January brought bitter cold and Eva's due date. The baby, however, seemed content to stay put, and by mid-February Eva was so uncomfortable she could barely sleep. When labor finally started on a sunny February morning, it progressed quickly, too quickly. Colt barely had time to fetch the midwife before their third child arrived, a healthy baby girl with a shock of dark hair and lungs that announced her presence to the entire ranch. "She's got your determination," Colt said with a tired laugh as their daughter screamed her displeasure at the world. "Already making sure everyone knows she's here." They named her Martha, after Colt's first wife, and the gesture felt right, a way of honoring the past while celebrating the present. Young Martha, they'd call her Marty to distinguish her from her namesake, did indeed have determination in spades. She nursed vigorously, slept in short bursts, and seemed perpetually dissatisfied with the pace at which the world moved. Grace was fascinated by her new sister, wanting to help with everything. William was less impressed, mostly concerned with how the baby had disrupted his routines. Life with 3 children under 4 years old was exhausting and overwhelming, and somehow still wonderful. Eva and Colt moved through their days in a fog of diaper changes and interrupted sleep, passing children back and forth, trading who got a nap when. The Bennetts helped where they could, and Sarah Cross appeared regularly with casseroles and offers to watch the older children. "How are you managing?" Catherine asked one afternoon when she stopped by with books she thought Grace might enjoy. Eva looked around at the chaotic house. Toys everywhere, laundry piling up, dishes in the sink. "Honestly, I have no idea, but we are." Catherine laughed. "That's more honest than most mothers will admit." She paused. "I wanted to ask you something. The school board is discussing expanding our curriculum, maybe adding some evening classes for adults. Reading, writing, basic mathematics for people who never had the chance to learn. I thought you might want to help teach." Eva was surprised. "Me? But I'm not a trained teacher." "No, but you're patient, you're good with people, and you understand what it's like to be underestimated and want to prove yourself." Catherine's voice was earnest. "Plus, you've been helping at the school all year. The children love you." The offer touched Eva deeply. Teaching adults who wanted to learn felt like a way to give back, to help others the way she'd been helped. "Let me talk to Colt," she said. "But yes, I like that." That evening, after the children were finally asleep, Eva brought it up. "It would be 2 evenings a week," she explained, "and only during the school year, not summer. I'd be home before bedtime." Colt didn't hesitate. "You should do it. You'd be good at it, and it would give you something that's just yours. Not about the ranch or the kids, but about you. You wouldn't mind handling everything alone those evenings?" Eva asked, "I've got James to help with the ranch work, and I'm perfectly capable of managing our children for a few hours." He grinned. "Might be chaos, but it'll be fine." So Eva began teaching reading to adults 2 evenings a week. Her class started with 6 students. 2 ranch hands who'd never learned, a widow who wanted to read the Bible herself instead of relying on others, and 3 women who'd married young and never had the chance for education. They were nervous at first, ashamed of not knowing what they thought they should. But Eva understood that shame, had felt it herself in different contexts, and she made the classroom a place where mistakes were just steps toward learning. One of her students was a woman named Ruth, probably in her 50s, who worked as a laundress. She struggled more than the others, letters swimming before her eyes, frustration making her want to quit. But Eva stayed patient, found different ways to explain, celebrated every small victory. The night Ruth read her first complete sentence, the cat sat on the mat. She cried with joy. "I never thought I'd be able to do this," she said through tears. "Never thought someone like me could learn." "Someone like you?" Eva asked gently. "Someone who's smart and determined and willing to work hard? Ruth, you're exactly the kind of person who should be learning." The moment reminded Eva of her own journey, how she thought she was weak and useless, how she discovered strengths she didn't know she had. Teaching these adults wasn't just about reading and writing. It was about showing them they were capable of more than they'd been told. By spring, her evening classes had grown to 12 students, and the school board was discussing adding more sessions. Eva found herself energized by the work, coming home tired but fulfilled. She was building something again, not just for her family, but for her community. One evening in April, as she walked home from class under a sky full of stars, Eva realized she'd stopped thinking of herself as someone who'd escaped a bad life. She'd become someone who'd built a good one. The difference was profound. One was about running away, the other about running toward. And she was definitely running toward something beautiful. Summer brought unexpected visitors. a young woman and her husband traveling through Redemption Ridge on their way further west. They stopped at the general store for supplies, and Dutch, always friendly, asked where they were headed. Oregon, the woman said, looking for a fresh start. Things got complicated back in Missouri. There was something in her voice, a familiar edge of fear and desperation, that made Dutch think of Eva. You might want to talk to Eva Brennan, he suggested. She came west a few years back for a fresh start. Build a good life here. Might have advice. That evening, the young couple appeared at the Brennan Ranch, introduced as Samuel and Caroline Ashworth. Eva's maiden name caught her for just a moment. Ashworth, not Ashford, but close enough to make old memories stir. Caroline was maybe 19, her hand protectively on a belly that showed early pregnancy. Samuel looked haunted, his eyes constantly scanning, as if expecting trouble. Eva invited them in for dinner, and over the meal, their story emerged in careful pieces. Caroline had been engaged to a wealthy man's son back in Missouri. When she'd fallen in love with Samuel, a poor farm worker, instead, the wealthy family had been furious. They'd tried to force the marriage anyway, claimed Caroline was mentally unstable, threatened to have her committed. Samuel and Caroline had run, married in secret, and were now trying to get far enough away that no one would come looking. Eva listened to the story with growing recognition. Different details, different names, but the same core narrative. A young woman trying to escape a future she hadn't chosen. A couple running from people who saw them as property rather than people. After dinner, while Colt showed Samuel around the ranch and discussed travel routes, Eva and Caroline sat on the porch with coffee. How did you do it? Caroline asked quietly. Dutch said you came west and built a life. How did you stop being scared? Eva looked out the land she and Colt had built into a home. Honestly, I don't know that the fear ever completely goes away, but it gets quieter. It becomes background noise instead of the main event. She turned to Caroline. What helps is building something real, something that's yours, making choices every day that reinforce who you want to be instead of who you were running from. Were you pregnant when you ran? Caroline asked, then flushed. I'm sorry, that's too personal. Eva said simply, I had my daughter in the worst blizzard of the year. Thought we would die, and got saved by a stranger who became my husband. She smiled. Life has a way of surprising you if you let it. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. I'm so scared. Scared they'll find us. Scared we'll fail. Scared I'm ruining Samuel's life. Samuel chose you, Eva pointed out, just like you chose him. That's not ruining his life. That's building one together. The scared part is natural. Use it to stay careful, but don't let it stop you from living. When the couple left the next morning, well supplied and armed with advice about the best routes west, Caroline hugged Eva tightly. Thank you for showing me it's possible. After they'd gone, Cole found Eva sitting on the porch steps, watching the horizon. You okay? Just thinking about how our choices ripple outward, Eva said. We ran, we survived, we built this life. And now, maybe our story helps someone else do the same. It feels important. Colt sat beside her. You become something of a legend, you know. Dutch talks about you all the time. The woman who came west with nothing and built everything. Says you're proof that starting over works. Eva laughed softly. If only they knew the whole truth. They know enough, Colt said. They know you're brave and strong and kind. They know you help anyone who needs it. That's what matters. That summer was busy but peaceful. The ranch flourished, their children grew, and Eva's evening classes continued to expand. She developed a reputation as someone who helped people, not just with reading and writing, but with practical advice about life on frontier. Women would come to her with questions about preserving food, treating sick children, managing difficult husbands. Eva would share what she'd learned, always careful to empower rather than dictate. In August, she received a letter that shocked her to her core. It was from Mr. Peterson, the Ashford family lawyer, who'd somehow tracked her down despite her changed name. Inside was a newspaper clipping from Silver Creek, NA. Short note: the clipping announced the opening of the Evangeline Ashford Memorial School for Girls, funded by Constance's estate and dedicated to providing education to young women regardless of their social standing. It would offer not just academic subjects, but practical skills: accounting, business management, public speaking, things that would allow graduates to support themselves if needed. The note from Mr. Peterson was brief. Mrs. Ashford left instructions that this school be built in your name, as she believed you would have wanted to help young women escape the limitations of traditional expectations. She regretted many things about your relationship, and this was her attempt at atonement. Thought you want to know your legacy exists, even if under another name. Eva read the clipping 3 times, emotions swirling. A school in her name, her old name, teaching girls to be independent and capable. It was everything she would have wanted but never expected. That evening, she showed Colt the letter. "What do you think it means?" he asked. "I think it means Constance understood more than I gave her credit for," Eva said slowly. "She saw what my father did to me, saw how the system trapped women, and decided to change it. Not for me, it's too late for me, but for others." She touched the clipping gently. "It means something good came from all that pain, something that will help girls avoid the trap I fell into." Over the following months, Eva found herself thinking about the Evangeline Ashford Memorial School often. She wrote to Mr. Peterson, asking for updates, and learned that the school had opened with 30 students and a waiting list of 50 more. Young women were hungry for education that would give them choices, and the school was providing it. In October, Eva made a decision. She wrote a letter to the school's headmistress, introducing herself not as Evangeline Ashford, but as a friend who'd known her. She described the skills she thought young women needed: practical accounting, negotiation, how to manage a household budget, how to recognize manipulation and control. She offered to contribute lesson plans and advice from the perspective of someone who'd lived through what many of those girls feared. The headmistress wrote back enthusiastically, thrilled to have input from someone who understood both the challenges and solutions. Over the next year, Eva and the headmistress exchanged regular letters, and Eva's insights helped shape the school's curriculum. In a strange way, Evangeline Ashford, the frightened girl who run into a blizzard, was still helping people. Her legacy wasn't just survival, it was transformation. And through the school, through her teaching in Redemption Ridge, through every conversation with a scared young woman looking for hope, that legacy continued to ripple outward, changing lives in ways Eva would never fully know. 5 years after that Christmas Eve in the barn, Eva stood in her expanded ranch house, preparing dinner, while controlled chaos swirled around her. Grace, now 7, was reading to her younger siblings, William, 5, and Marty, 3, while simultaneously keeping an eye on the twins, 2-year-old boys named Daniel and Matthew, who'd arrived unexpectedly last year and immediately doubled the household's energy level. Colt came in from the fields with James Bennett, both men dusty and tired but satisfied. The ranch had grown substantially, now one of the most successful operations in the territory. They'd hired 2 more families to help manage the expanded acreage, build additional houses for workers, and create a small community within their property. "Smells good," Colt said, kissing Eva's cheek and snagging a piece of bread from the counter. Sarah's bringing dessert, and Catherine's coming too. Said she has news. Eva smiled. Their dinner table had become a gathering place for friends and workers, rarely fewer than 10 people sharing the evening meal. She'd learned to cook in bulk, and their expanded kitchen made feeding a crowd possible, if not always easy. The dinner was lively and loud, conversations overlapping, children interrupting, laughter punctuating every story. After the meal, while the children played outside under Grace's watchful supervision, the adults lingered over coffee. Catherine cleared her throat. "I have an announcement. I'm getting married." The table erupted in congratulations and questions. Catherine blushed, explaining that she'd been corresponding with a doctor in Denver who was planning to move to Redemption Ridge to open a practice. They'd fallen in love through letters and decided to marry when he arrived next month. And Catherine continued, her eyes finding Eva's. "I'm hoping Eva will take over school while I'm honeymooning. Maybe permanently, if she's interested. I like to focus on helping my husband establish his practice, and you're a better teacher than you think." Eva was stunned. "Catherine, I'm not qualified. You're more qualified than I was when I started," Catherine interrupted. "You've been teaching adult classes for 3 years. You understand these families, know their challenges, care about their children. The school board already approved it. They want you." The offer was tempting and terrifying. Teaching at the school would mean less time on the ranch, but the Bennetts and other workers could handle most of the day-to-day operations. And education had become Eva's passion, watching people discover they were capable of more than they believed. "Can I think about it?" Eva asked. "Of course," Catherine said. "But, Eva, you've built something remarkable here. You came to Redemption Ridge with nothing, and now you're one of the most respected people in the community. You teach adults to read, advise young women, manage a successful ranch, raise 5 children. You've proven you can do anything you set your mind to." That night, Eva discussed it with Colt. It would mean a lot of time away from the ranch, from the children. "The children are in school most of the day anyway," Colt pointed out. "And Eva, you light up when you talk about teaching. I see it in your eyes, the same way you used to look when you first started helping at the school. This is important to you." "But what about nothing?" Colt interrupted gently. "We have help. We have resources. We have a community that supports us. You've spent 5 years building everyone else up. Maybe it's time to build yourself up too. Take the job. Become the teacher you already are." 2 weeks later, Eva stood in front of the Redemption Ridge School as its new headmistress. The title felt strange and wonderful, a far cry from the frightened woman who'd hidden in Colt's back room, jumping at every sound. She not only survived, she thrived. The school grew under her leadership. She hired 2 additional teachers, expanded the curriculum to include practical skills alongside traditional subjects, and continued the adult education classes in the evenings. She advocated for children from the poorest families, making sure they had books and supplies even when their parents couldn't afford them. By the following spring, enrollment had doubled, and the school board was discussing building a second, larger school. Eva was asked to oversee the project, her opinion sought on everything from curriculum to architecture. One afternoon in May, 6 years after Christmas Eve in the barn, a telegram arrived at the ranch. It was from the Evangeline Ashford Memorial School in Silver Creek, asking if Eva Brennan might be willing to visit and consult on their expanding program. They'd heard about her work in Redemption Ridge and wanted her expertise. Eva stared at the telegram for a long time, returned to Silver Creek, to the place she'd fled in terror, Walk into a school bearing her old name and pretend to be someone else? It seemed impossible, but it also seemed important. She could help shape the education of young women who might otherwise end up trapped like she'd been. She could influence the next generation in ways that honored both who she'd been and who she'd become. "I think I should go," she told Colt that evening. He didn't look surprised. "I think you should too. Face the past, make peace with it, use it to build something good." "Will you come with me?" Eva asked. "I don't think I can do it alone." Colt pulled her close. "Eva, you can do it alone. You're strong enough. But you don't have to. Of course I'll come." They made the trip in June, leaving the children with the Bennetts and Sarah Cross. The journey to Silver Creek felt surreal, retracing a route Eva had fled in terror, now returning as a confident, accomplished woman. When Silver Creek came into view, Eva felt her stomach tighten, old fears rising. But Colt squeezed her hand, and she breathed through the anxiety. They went first to the Evangeline Ashford Memorial School, a beautiful brick building on what had been the Ashford Estate grounds. The mansion itself had been torn down, the grounds converted into gardens and athletic fields for the school. Eva walked through spaces where her father's cruelty had once reigned, now filled with young women's laughter and learning. The headmistress, Mrs. Eleanor Grant, welcomed them warmly. She was a progressive educator who'd studied in Boston and believed passionately in women's education. "Mrs. Brennan, your letters have been invaluable. Your insights into practical life skills, your understanding of what young women need to thrive. It shaped our entire program." She had no idea she was talking to Evangeline Ashford herself. Eva spent 2 days consulting with the school, offering suggestions, sharing curriculum ideas, watching the students. These girls, some wealthy, some poor, all eager, were learning to be independent, to think critically, to prepare for lives beyond just marriage and motherhood. On the final evening, as they prepared to leave, Eva asked Mrs. Grant about the school's namesake. "What do you know about Evangeline Ashford?" Mrs. Grant's expression grew sad. "Not much, unfortunately. She was Raymond Ashford's daughter, died tragically young. Ran away and froze to death in a blizzard, pregnant and alone. Her stepmother founded the school in her memory, feeling that if Evangeline had been educated and independent, she might have made different choices." She paused. "We tell the students her story as a cautionary tale, but also as inspiration, that something good can come from tragedy, that one woman's suffering can become another generation's opportunity." Eva felt tears prick her eyes. That's a beautiful way to remember her. As they rode away from Silver Creek for the last time, Eva felt something shift, the final piece of healing clicking into place. Evangeline Ashford hadn't just died in that blizzard. She'd been transformed, and her legacy wasn't tragedy. It was hope. It was every girl who learned she had choices, every woman who discovered her own strength, every person who refused to be defined by their worst moments. Back in Redemption Ridge, Eva threw herself into her work with renewed purpose. She expanded the school further, advocated for education funding at the territorial level, and continued teaching evening classes. Her reputation grew. People began calling her the teacher who changed Redemption Ridge, though she always deflected credit to community. 10 years after that Christmas Eve, Eva stood in front of the new, larger Redemption Ridge School at its dedication ceremony. The original building had been expanded 3 times, but finally they'd built a proper schoolhouse that could serve the growing population. Father Morrison blessed the building. Dutch gave a speech about community investment. And then Eva was asked to say a few words. She looked out at the crowd, her children, Grace now 12, and already talking about becoming a teacher herself. Colt standing proud beside the Bennetts, Sarah and Helen, and Catherine with her doctor husband, the family she taught, the students she'd helped. I came to Redemption Ridge with nothing, Eva began, her voice steady. No money, no prospects, no idea how to survive. But this community welcomed me, taught me, gave me chances I didn't think I deserved. This school represents everything I've learned, that education is power, that knowledge creates choices, that every person deserves the opportunity to become their best self. She paused, emotion threatening to break her voice. Someone once told me that happiness isn't something you find. It's something you build, one choice at a time. This school is part of that building. Every child who learns here, every adult who discovers they're capable more than they knew, every person who walks through these doors and leaves stronger. That's us building happiness together. That's us creating a community where everyone has a chance. The crowd erupted in applause, and Eva stepped down to find Colt waiting with open arms. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. "So damn proud." That evening, as they walked home as a family, their 5 children ranging ahead with their friends, Eva felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. She'd not only survived, she'd created something meaningful. She'd turned her trauma into purpose, her fear into courage, her escape into a foundation for others. "Mama," Grace said, falling back to walk beside her, "when I'm older, I want to be like you. I want to help people and teach and make things better." Eva's heart swelled. "You can be anything you want, sweetheart. That's the whole point, you get to choose." "Because you chose to run?" Grace asked. It was a question her daughter had asked before, sensing there was more to her mother's story than the sanitized version they'd been told. Eva considered her answer carefully. "Because I chose to survive, and then I chose to live, and then I chose to help others do the same." Every choice builds on the one before. 15 years after that Christmas Eve in the barn, Eva Brennan stood in her kitchen on a snowy December morning, preparing for the annual Christmas Eve gathering they now hosted every year. The tradition had started small, just their family and a few close friends, but had grown into a community celebration. Nearly 50 people would crowd into their expanded home tonight, sharing food and stories and the warmth of belonging. The ranch house had been renovated and expanded multiple times, but Eva had insisted they keep the original structure at its core. The room where she'd first slept after Colt rescued her was now part of a larger bedroom wing, but she could still trace the outline of that first small space. She wanted to remember where they'd started, wanted her children to understand that everything they had was built on the foundation of one man's kindness and one woman's courage. Grace, now 17, was away at the Territorial College studying to become a teacher. She'd be home for Christmas tomorrow, bringing books and stories and that fierce intelligence that reminded Eva so much of herself at that age. Except Grace had confidence Eva had never known at 17, had been raised believing she could accomplish anything. William, 15, was helping Colt in the barn, already showing the same steady reliability his father exemplified. Marty, 13, was currently covered in flour, attempting to bake cookies with more enthusiasm than skill. The twins, Daniel and Matthew, now 12, were supposed to be decorating, but were instead having a snowball fight with the Bennett children. And the youngest, 7-year-old Rebecca, born late and unexpectedly, was reading in the corner, already showing signs of becoming as much of a bookworm as Grace. "Mama, the cookies are smoking." Marty's panicked voice pulled Eva from her thoughts. She rushed to rescue the cookies, mostly burnt but salvageable, and hug her daughter. "It's all right. We'll scrape off the worst parts. Nobody will notice once they're covered in enough frosting." Marty laughed, and the sound filled Eva with joy. Her children had never known fear the way she had. They'd been raised with love and security, taught they were capable and valued, encouraged to pursue their dreams. They represented everything she'd fought for in that blizzard. A future free from the chains that had bound her. As guests began arriving that evening, Eva moved through the crowd with easy grace. Sarah Cross, now elderly but still sharp as ever, held court in the corner sharing stories of Redemption Ridge's early days. Helen and her husband managed their own ranch now, successful in content. Catherine and her doctor husband had 3 children and had helped establish Redemption Ridge's first proper medical clinic. Dutch was teaching his grandson to play the fiddle, the next generation of community musician. The Bennetts had bought their own property but remained close friends and partners. And scattered throughout were the dozens of people Eva had taught over the years, adults who'd learned to read in her evening classes, students who'd gone to the school, young women she'd mentored and advised. Each one represented a life touched, a choice made, a future changed. Father Morrison asked for everyone's attention and raised his glass. 15 years ago, this community was just a scattered collection of ranches barely holding on. Now look at us, a school, a church, a medical clinic, thriving businesses, and most importantly, a real community where people look out for each other. And much of that is thanks to 2 people. He gestured to Eva and Colt Brennan, who showed us what quiet integrity looks like, and Eva Brennan, who showed us what courage and compassion can build. The crowd applauded, and Eva felt her face heat with embarrassment. She'd never been comfortable with praise, always feeling like a fraud who'd simply been lucky. But Colt squeezed her hand and whispered, "Let them honor what you've done. You've earned it." After dinner, as the evening wound down and children started falling asleep in corners, Eva slipped outside for a moment of quiet. The snow was falling softly, the night cold but not bitter. She walked the barn, the same barn where everything had changed. It had been expanded and improved, but the old section remained, and she stepped inside, breathing the familiar scent of hay and horses. "Thought I'd find you here." Colt's voice came from behind her. He joined her in the dim space, lantern in hand. So similar to that night 15 years ago. "Just remembering," Eva said softly, "that Christmas Eve. How certain I was at Grace and I would die. How I'd given up hope." And then Colt prompted, though he knew the story by heart. "And then you appeared, like a miracle, or maybe like exactly what was supposed to happen, if I just had the courage to get there." She turned to face him. "You saved us, Colt. Not just our lives, but our futures." He pulled her close. "We saved each other, Eva. I was dead inside before you and Grace came, just going through motions, waiting for life to end. You gave me a reason to live again." They stood together in the barn, holding each other while snow fell outside and their home glowed warm with family and friends. 15 years of choices, of building, of growing. Do you ever regret it? Eva asked, lying to Cain, protecting us, taking that risk? Not for a single second. Colt said firmly, "Best decision I ever made." Even with all the complications, 5 children, a demanding wife who insisted on teaching school, constant chaos, Eva asked with a small smile, "Especially with all that," Colt said, "Eva, you didn't complicate my life. You gave me a life worth living." They walked back to the house together, and through the windows, Eva could see their children, their friends, the life they'd built together. Tomorrow, Grace would arrive home, and their family would be complete. They'd exchange gifts and share stories and celebrate Christmas the way it was meant to be celebrated, with love and joy and gratitude for second chances. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, Eva allowed herself to fully appreciate the journey. From Evangeline Ashford, trapped and terrified in Silver Creek, to Eva Brennan, teacher and mother and pillar of her community. From running through a blizzard certain of death, to standing in warmth and safety surrounded by people who loved her. The transformation was complete, not because she'd erased her past, but because she built a present so strong that the past had lost its power to define her. As she climbed into bed that night, with Colt beside her and the sounds of her sleeping children filling the house, Eva thought about all the versions of herself she'd been. The frightened girl, the desperate mother, the woman learning to trust, the wife learning to love, the teacher learning to lead. Each version had been necessary. Each had taught her something vital. And now, at 40, Eva Brennan knew exactly who she was. Someone who'd survived, thrived, and used her second chance to give others the same opportunity. Someone who'd turned one man's kindness into a legacy of compassion. Someone who'd proven that the darkest moments could lead to the brightest futures, if you had the courage to keep moving forward. She thought about the Evangeline Ashford Memorial School in Silver Creek, still teaching young women to be independent and strong. She thought about the students who'd passed through Redemption Ridge's school, now building lives of their own across the territory. She thought about Caroline and Samuel, the young couple she'd advised, who'd sent a letter last year from Oregon describing their thriving farm and growing family. She thought about every life touched, every choice made possible, every person who'd found courage because someone else had shown them it was possible. This was her legacy, not wealth or status or social position, but the ripples of kindness spreading outward, generation after generation. As sleep claimed her, Eva's last thought was of that Christmas Eve 15 years ago, the moment everything changed. She found shelter in a barn, warmth in a stranger's kindness, and courage in the darkest hour. And from that single night, this entire beautiful life had grown. Tomorrow they'd celebrate Christmas. But tonight, Eva Brennan celebrated something even more precious. The journey from survival to joy, from fear to love, from running away to finally coming home. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales from the Wild West. And don't forget, drop a comment below telling me what you learned from the whole story. Your engagement helps this channel grow and brings more stories to life. Until next time, remember, sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never saw coming.